right, so here we are in our driveway, and so bear with us because the wind may pick up, and I have to grab the tent, which is necessary because of the rain. And the lighting may be exciting; it may be a thing because it's darker than we had anticipated. But we've got a bunch of like little mini lights, so we'll just see how it goes. So as always, thanks to our longtime supporters, um, Yiffy and Ori Winkler, and also Chris Lee and Karen Lee Duffel, who are our Patreon subscribers. So 10 out of 10 will send feet pics.
No, he thinks it.
Not to Chris.
Why we are outside. That we expanded our audience.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. So yeah, we have more people in the audience behind us here. Long time friends of the show, Corey and Tim. Longtime fan, Yiffy is joining us in live, and then also my executive producers' parents, the lovely Cindy and Evan, are back there, and Olivia's in the corner, doing whatever she's doing. And so we may have other people later, depending. Who knows how the thing goes. So having said that, I kind of figured this is sort of a grab bag show because I didn't really have an idea for like a super big topic I want to talk about necessarily. But a bunch of people had suggested topics that I didn't think would really go for the whole time. So I figured we would just do like a bunch of different little mini topics, right? We'd do a bunch of little things. So, and a bunch of people suggested topics this afternoon when we posted the thing that were like the kind of thing I need to go like research on extensively. And so, unfortunately, Justin Stewart, I'm looking at you. He had some good topic ideas, but I'm like, that's the kind of thing I would need to go like actually spend a little while like researching before I got drunk and talked about extemporaneously, which is kind of the difficulty that we have. But as always, drop a line in the comments. Let us know that you're there. We'll give you a shout out. And if you have a question, chime in. And if you have another topic that you want to cover, like it's, once we get started with the topic, we'll do it. But if you want to throw something else in, we can work it in alongside our other topics. Right? We may. I don't really know how long we're going to go tonight in terms of like how long each topic's going to be. Right? Some of these are relatively limited scale topics in the sense that I don't have as much to say about them as I do about like Vietnam, for example. So, all right, do we have any comments yet?
Stephanie's there.
Cool.
There's another person watching, but it might be somebody that's very
No. I don't know. The watcher was coming from in the garage.
I mean, if you just decide to do it, just make sure you turn your volume off.
Yeah, we don't want to get reverb. So is the kids with the basketballs that annoying?
I mean, I can hear it, but I can hear you more.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, sports, whatever.
It's outside. It's the yard.
I imagine they'll eventually stop.
Stephanie missed why we were outside.
Because we expanded our audience. We have more people watching, so we want to keep it socially distant. And so, and you can't see, but everyone's hanging out in my lovely garage, which is full of my stuff. Yeah. Well, drinks, just like high school. What? So Stephanie will like this because the first topic we will discuss is one that she specifically mentioned and brought up. And what I really wanted to do was to talk about the Enlightenment, because I love it and I know that it's like her least favorite thing to talk about ever. But she asked last week, and I believe prior, about Margaret Thatcher. So we're going to talk about Margaret Thatcher. Okay, the Iron Lady, the proverbial Iron Lady. So all right, let's talk about Margaret Thatcher. Let's do it. It's going to be a wild ride. So Margaret Thatcher was born it's like in the 30s or something, I don't know. And she's from a little town in Britain called Grantham, which is a completely forgettable, horrible, awful, basically just basic British place, right? And her dad owned, I think it was a pharmacy, a chemist shop, they call them in Britain. And so she spent a huge amount of time in her youth working in the store, like spending time in the store, like, like serving customers and like doing inventory and stuff. And so she went off to college in the 50s, and she ended up getting a degree in science. And she already, by the time she graduated college, she was kind of like 1 foot in science, 1 foot kind of into politics, right? She was kind of already getting the idea that she wasn't going to necessarily spend a lot of time working in the scientific field. But she was always very proud of her science degree. She always thought that like it was not an easy thing that she did, and she got a good degree, and she worked very hard, and she knew a lot of science. Right, and there was very much an idea that like, what do you even need a science degree for, right? And she was very proud. She said that she was more proud of having been the first British prime minister with a science degree than she was of having been the first female British prime minister. because she said, I feel like there are times when you discuss issues in the government where it really matters that you have some scientific literacy as opposed to just, getting a bunch of advisors to tell you about stuff. Like weird, for example, like a pandemic. I don't know. It's weird that you'd mention that. So anyway, what's that? Yeah, I know, right? And so anyway, she gets this chemistry degree and she works for a little while for a couple companies. And even at this early point in the 50s, she's kind of like out working for the Conservative Party. Like she's on the hustings, she's giving speeches, and there was one point where, if I remember correctly, there's a British conservative Tory MP who's running for re-election, and she like gets the chance to go give like a speech for him in the hustings, and everybody was like, okay, lady, or whatever. And she got up there when it was her time and just like, boom, nailed it. And everybody was like, damn, this lady knows what her shit is. And her classic Margaret Thatcher is that she was absolutely ice cold and just lethal as a speaker. Didn't have time for anybody, didn't suffer fools gladly, but was also very smart, very prepared, and very on the ball. And part of it was that was her personality, and part of it also was that if she had done a bad job, it would have been like, well, you're just a woman, So there was a sort of defensiveness, I think, about it. Like a lot of women, you had to work twice as hard and be twice as perfect in order to be able to be accepted half as much because you're a woman, right? And so she ends up in the 60s working in the shadow or working in the Tory government. She's the education minister, and this is a good time to give you a good Margaret Thatcher story. So in English schools for a long time, everybody had free milk, right? It was just one of these wacky things the English people do is free milk. They just do free milk. And it's exciting. So much going on around us. It's just so much life is happening. And so they do free milk, right? And it's just like this thing that they do, whatever. Everybody gets a glass of milk, right? And it's hot milk because the British are awful and it's wrong. But anyway, her predecessor, a labor guy, had abolished free milk for middle and high school kids because it was like costing a ton of money and it was sort of this thing that nobody cared about or whatever. And so she went ahead and followed it by abolishing it for primary school kids, elementary school kids, right? And on the one hand, it's like, hey, she was like, look, it wastes a bunch of money and like nobody likes it. And it's just like, it's sort of pointless. And why are we doing it? This dates back from the time when kids like had nutritional deficiencies and the state really stepped in to give, but she's like, come on, like, nobody really takes it seriously. And of course, later on in her career, it was sort of like, oh, she's the witch that took the milk away from the kids, right? Like, here's the political ad of little Timmy's about to take a sip of milk. And Margaret Thatcher's like, whoosh, get it out of there. And she like takes milk from kids, right? And in context, it's like it was a lot more complicated than that, right? But she got this reputation as being this kind of hard-hearted person, right? So she ends up as Minister of Education. That's when she did the milk thing. She took the milk away from little Timmy, right? And then in the mid '70s, she ends up in the opposition, right? And the Tories like her so much that they put her, when she's in the opposition, in the shadow cabinet, which is to say that the shadow, when your party is not the majority party in the British government, you actually form a completely non-active but alternative version of the government. The idea being that each of the people you select, you say like, okay, this is my shadow education minister and this is my shadow home secretary. The idea is that like they're instantly ready to be in the government. If there's an election, you can say to people, this is who I would choose, right? I mean, these are the people that you would have running the government. Look at how much more competent like this guy is than the actual labor, whatever education minister, right? And also being high enough rank in the party to qualify as a member of the shadow cabinet, it's a signal that like the party thinks that you're a big deal, and presumably if there's an election, you'd be up for cabinet rank and whatever, right? And so she's in the shadow government, right? And so to make a long story short, in the late '70s, the Tories get elected again. Sir Edward Heath is the prime minister, and he's this big sort of blustery kind of guy, whatever. And she led a coup where they destroyed Heath. They got him out, and she became they had a general election, and she won in 1979. And Heath always was vaguely contemptuous of her. Right, Heath was always sort of like, you're just a woman, you're stupid, whatever. But at the same time, he was also kind of a sort of douche nozzle of a prime minister, and so she sort of delighted in getting rid of this guy who she thought was kind of a fool and an idiot. Right? What did she think the shadow government was?
I don't know.
I want to tell us what you think shadow government is. Yeah, I mean, if she explains what she thought it meant, who knows? And so, having said that, what else can we say about her? Well, she takes office in '79, and you could really divide her tenure She's 1979, 1990, one of the longest serving British prime ministers, easily the most significant of the 20th century, other than no, it's like a little like a quasi official thing where like if the Labour Party's running the government and we're the Tory party, like if I'm the leader of the Tory party, I'm the shadow PM, right? And it's the presumption is that like I'm the guy that if the election had been won by my party, I would be the guy being the prime minister, and this is like my cabinet, right? And again, it's intended to show off like these are the people that would be running the country of the
It's really a weird thing based on the British parliamentary style of a party wins and then has to establish cabinet.
correct because in like in America you vote for a guy, you vote for like Donald Trump, you elected him, right? You don't elect the party, and you vote for individual. Yeah, Israeli has cabinet too, it's cabinet government too. Yeah. It's a parliamentary system. And Israel's different because Israel, like a lot of parliamentary countries, has 47 million parties. Baskin Robbins, 32 flavors of parties, right? There's like 80, and recently it's been Likud has been the big one, and then there's been a variety of alternative, like liberal parties that have risen and fallen in an attempt to displace the Likud. But there's also a whole bunch of little tiny other parties, like there's United Torah Judaism, and there's like Shas, and there's like the Arab parties, and there's like the Arab list or something. There's a whole bunch of little tiny mini parties. But Britain is like America in that it has parliamentary government, yes, different, but also the same, two basic parties, right? There's pretty much been since really the early 20th century, the Labour Party and the Tory Party, the Conservative Party, right? There's some other ones too. Recently, a Brexit Party, and also there was British National Party for a while, but those guys are racist. And then also there was the Lib Dems, Liberal Democrat Party, but they're pretty small, right? And under rare circumstances, do they exercise any kind of significant amount of influence, right? And so the shadow government is a weird function of British government where when you vote for your particular member of parliament. Like it'll be like this guy running against this person, and you pick the one you like. But when the winner of the election is the party who won the most seats in parliament. Right, and so the ability to form a government and become the prime minister, the equivalent of our president, is not separate from the parliamentary elections. Whereas we can, for example, elect a Republican president and a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. The British cannot. The person who runs their parliament, the majority of the parliament, is also the prime minister, right? And so if you're the minority party, then you produce a shadow cabinet to sort of in a sense, get up to speed and be ready if you want an election to already have people in position to take over. Right? It's sort of just a kind of like an opposition thing that you do. And so, and it's telling that she was a shadow. She was Minister of Education, then in the shadow cabinet in the 70s when Labor won, right? Because I mean, it was a signal that like this is a very she's very smart, she's very put together, she knows her stuff, and if we won a majority, like she'd obviously be up for a cabinet post. And lo and behold, when the Tories won, she was in Heath's cabinet, but only for a little while because it wasn't long before she led the coup that ousted him, and she became PM in her own right. So if that makes sense. Hashtag British Parliament, parliamentary politics.
Stephanie really wants to know about the nickname the Iron.
Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about it. And so a couple things you could say about Margaret Thatcher's deal, right? It's just so exciting, whatever's happening, I don't care. And so you could really kind of divide her tenure into the beginning, which was sort of horrible, the middle, which was a little better, and then the end, which it all kind of just fell apart, right? And so in the beginning, what can we say about the beginning? Well, she came in at a time when the British economy was just totally stagnant. It was the 70s. Everybody had a bad time. It was bad in everywhere. They used to say that you couldn't have high unemployment and high inflation at the same time. That was the basis of Keynesian monetary theory. And it turned out you totally can, right? And they had what they called stagflation, where the economy was stagnant. Unemployment didn't go down, jobs didn't go up, and inflation was also stubbornly high. Interest rates were high. And it was thought that the genius of Keynesianism was like, at least you only get one bad thing, right? Employment goes down, inflation goes up, but employment's down. Employment goes up, inflation goes down, but that's like inflation's down. But it turned out the 70s was just bad. And economists in America used to frequently, they used to add together the inflation rate and the unemployment rate, and they would call it the misery index. And the worse it got, they were able to say like, look, the misery index is like worse this year than last year, right? And that was the centerpiece of Ronald Reagan's campaign in 1980, where he was like, the entire theme of the campaign was, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago when Jimmy Carter became president, or worse, or basically the same? Right? And Reagan famously said, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job, and a recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his, which is like grand slam one-liner. Reagan was good at he was bad at some things. He was good at negotiating with terrorists. He was good at selling weapons to terrorists. He was also good at doing a variety of bad things. He was also good at pandering to racists, but he was also stellar at one-liners. And that was one of his best, right? And so Thatcher comes into England, and it's kind of the same thing. The British Union movement had won these huge concessions in the 20th century. They had basically run, the British government for a while. The Labour Party was really involved with the unions, and they had done some really impressive things. They set up the modern welfare state. The Beveridge Report recommended the creation of the National Health Service, and they sort of have really created the modern welfare state. But at the same time, the unions had gotten to the point where they were sort of huge. They had kind of really affected negatively productivity in a whole bunch of industries. You might say that there's a pendulum and it swung really heavily in favor of the unions. And most British people argued that like the economy was not going to recover unless somebody went to war with the unions and really kind of reduced the amount of privileges they had and kind of got the economy back sort of in the swing again. And that's what Margaret Thatcher sort of set out to do. And she had a couple of things on her plate. The economy was like the big one. And what she wanted to do was to raise taxes, to generate more spending for the government. She wanted to sort of pick a fight with the unions and win it and crush them. And so that she also wanted to begin to privatize parts of the British economy, particularly the rail system, which is this huge thing in Britain. We don't do trains, but in Britain, everywhere else they do trains. But in Britain, the rail system had been privatized by the Labour government, and or nationalized by the Labour government. She wanted to privatize it so that it would be better, right? And so in the beginning, everything was awful. It was awful. The economy didn't do anything. Taxes went up. Nothing changed. She picked fights with the unions. They appeared to win. And she also came up with her signature idea, was the poll tax. Okay, so in America, poll taxes are racism, and the Supreme Court actually said in like the 40s you can't have poll taxes because black people, right? And so it was a rare moment when the Supreme Court. It was like a case in Alabama or whatever where they threw out a poll tax and they said you can't charge people to vote. Well, because that's why the Supreme Court was like, you can't use poll taxes because they're more or less systematically used to deprive black people of vote. And so, having said that, in England, they had a tax that was called, I forget what it was called, like the council fee or something, and it was to fund local government. And what Labour had done is something Margaret Thatcher really hated, is that they had taken away all of the power of the local governments and pulled it into Whitehall, pulled it into London, and basically they had sort of removed the ability of local governments to sort of do anything meaningful. And for Margaret Thatcher and a lot of Tories, the local government's like the on-ramp to democracy. I mean, this is like, you're in your little town, you can run it how you like, you have a town meeting, and that's the ideal, right? And like, shouldn't the town have its own taxes and like be able to spend its own money and have its own decisions, do what it wants? And that's how you like build the idea in people's heads that like you live in a democracy, right? You live in a country where you get to say how things are, because like you want to build a new town hall, you want to renovate the park, you want to build a new high, like do it, right? And so for her, you couldn't do that until you got the councils, the local, what we would call them county governments today, or like municipal governments. You got them more taxes. And the tax rate had been a thing where it was like 20% of the total assessed value of your house divided among the number of tenants. And it was incredibly fucking complicated, and it just did not work. It just didn't work. Because if you rented an apartment building, you had to divide it up among all your residents, and in some places like little tiny towns in rural England it was pretty straightforward, but like in a big city like London is total madness. North in Scotland is total madness. People just didn't pay it and there was no way to go after them. College towns who rented apartments to people like by semester, they had no idea how to assess this. And so she came up with the idea of what came to be known as a poll tax, because what they would do is they look at the voter rolls and they would say, if you're registered to vote at a location, you have to pay a tax. You have to pay part of the tax on that location, and it will be like a flat fee assessed to you at the address you live, and it'll go directly to the local council government. And it's not a bad idea. It's one of those ideas that when you look at it, it has sort of a reasonable to it, but it provoked humongous opposition. Because it was introduced first in Scotland and they abandoned it because it was so unpopular. And then when it was introduced in London, there were riots over the poll tax. And everybody was like, wait a minute, Scotland gets to weasel out of it and like we don't? And so it became, over the course of the 1980s, this long rumbling, sort of humongous multi-year fiasco that like unfolded only gradually. And by the time of its full implementation in the 90s, there were literal riots in the streets in London when they tried to introduce the poll tax. And Margaret Thatcher got this reputation as a woman who was absolutely just sort of hell-bent on doing this, and regardless or whatever. And so this leads us to her two nicknames we can mention, two things associated with her. Stephanie asked about the Iron Lady. There was a whole thing. She gave a speech at the Tories conference one year, like 1982, where she described herself as the Iron Lady, a nickname that had been given to her by the tabloid press. And she was like, here I am in my red satin dress with my hair all done up, but I'm the Iron Lady. And the Tories, they loved it. They loved that they had this like tough as nails prime minister, right? And about the poll tax in 1982, they had this huge. The Tories had this sort of come to Jesus meeting where they were like, "This fucking poll tax is gonna kill us. Like everybody hates it." And she was like, "You know what?" She gave a speech. She said, "You know what? The tabloids, they may be waiting for me to say that we need to have a U-turn, a policy U-turn. But you can go ahead and say whatever you. Because this lady's not for turning." And it was like boom speech, like slogan, like this lady's not for turning. And in fact, the first volume of her official biography, which was written by an architectural historian named Charles Moore, in England, it was called "This Lady's Not for Turning," because it went up to that point, right? And so in America, it was called "From Grantham to the Falklands," which is a stupid title, but whatever. And so I fortunately they didn't publish the third volume in America. I had to buy it from England, and so I got the British one where the titles are all different because that's just a thing publishers do. If you're a publisher and you're watching this, when you publish a book in England, you can keep the same fucking title. You don't need to change the titles. It need to be some bullshit, right? And so it's just dumb. Just put it out the same. I don't need to wait. Yeah, I don't need to wait. I'm already going to wait for Peter F. Hamilton's new sci-fi novel is delayed. He said it was because the American publisher, had backlogs in printing and publishing. But it's frustrating when a book comes out in the UK in now, and it comes out, to be published in America in 2075. Yeah, and so you have to get it from the UK and bring it to me. Like Peter F. Hamilton, Stephen Erickson, Alastair Reynolds, all my sci-fi people. Yeah.
Stephanie asks why modern Brit.
Well, she's extremely controversial. It's turned out the Tories love her because she got them into power and she set the stage for modern Tory politics. This sort of neoliberal, free market, market-based solutions, limited government, the privatization of nationalized industries. They love that stuff. That was sort of she essentially created in a way the modern Tory party until now when it has become obsessed with Brexit. Right. And she set the stage for a lot of stuff. On the other hand, she's a hate figure by many people on the left because they viewed her as this absolutely uncompromising, uncaring, sort of just awful person who pursued her goals even when they were not popular, even when they were shown not to work. And I will say, you could say two negative things about Margaret Thatcher. When she decided on something, that was just it. It was just, we're going to do this. That's it. Shut up. You're wrong. I'm going to do it. Even when it was like people would point out legitimate reasons why maybe you don't want to do this, right? And the other thing is, personally, privately, she was an awful person. If you got in a dispute with her, she could be terribly cruel. She was in cabinet meetings. She was relentless in her criticism of her subordinates to their face, and she was just a nasty person. She wasn't really like a warm, kind-hearted person. You could disagree with George W. Bush's politics, and I do, but there's no indication that when you worked for him, he was like a bad guy. Like he seemed to genuinely care about his subordinates. He genuinely valued, like let's all work together as a team. I'm not going to be a jerk to your face. He had birthday parties for reporters in the press room where he brought in cakes. There's a reporter who had a birthday and a press conference, and he had a cake. He brought in a cake, and he sang "Happy Birthday" and served slices of cake to all the White House press corps. And Margaret Thatcher would have never done that. First of all, she understandably, the spectacle of a woman prime minister serving cake would have been, but she just it never would have occurred to her to do that gesture. To be like, we could. Right, like but she was even more stiff upper lip than that, right? And the biography of her that I've read, her official biography, is loaded with quotes where in cabinet meetings she's like, this report that you submitted is stupid, but I guess that's okay because you're a moron, am I right? And it was like people would just like go into the next room and cry, and they would just like she was just so harsh and cruel.
But I would say I've seen, and it's hard because the British have interesting laws about filming things that happen in Parliament. Mm-hmm. But I have seen backbenchers and parliamentary members get really nasty.
Oh, question time. Yeah. Well, question time is when the British Prime Minister has to go to the well of Parliament and he has to give a speech about so this is what we're doing. And then he opens the floor and they shout questions at him and you have to answer them. And this is a question time. John McCain tried to get question time into the U.S. Senate where the senators would get to ask the president questions. And the president was like, no. Margaret Thatcher held her own in question time. I mean, she did a couple of question times where she humiliated labor because she knew more about whatever they were complaining about, right? They would be like, you hate unions. And she was like, well, let's talk about unions. And she'd give a big speech and everyone's like, how did you know that? How did you know these weird details about? And so part of it, I think, was, of course, you had to be tough, but again, I read Charles Moore's biography of her, and he loves her. He's way up her ass. But even he had to admit that, like, here's some examples of when she was basically like pretty heartless. And it's like, here's an example of a time she gave a speech and was just like cruel to somebody for no reason. And that was sort of, that's part of why, if you're a liberal, she was not just a person who disagreed with your policies. She seemed to relish doing so, even when it was like an awful, cruel, like mean thing. You know what I mean? Even when it was like a harsh thing, right? And so let's talk then about the thing that saved Margaret Thatcher's career. The economy is in the toilet. The poll tax is already on the radar as being unpopular. And then, lo and behold, Argentina goes to war with Britain. Spoiler alert, nobody saw it. Nobody saw it coming. What's the deal? There's some islands off the coast of southeastern Argentina, Las Islas Malvinas, or the Falkland Islands. They had been colonized by the Britons a long time ago. The Argentinians claimed them as Argentina. The British claimed there's like British citizens living there. And in I want to say is 82 or 3 is 82, I think. Right when everything was bad for her, it was the worst moment of her career. She was not going to survive as prime minister. It was terribly unpopular. The Argentinians invaded the Falklands, and it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know, Britain was so diminished in the world. I mean, the Suez Canal incident in 1956, they had retreated from Suez. They had retreated from Malaya. They had retreated from India. They had retreated from Pakistan. They had moved out of Africa. It was Macmillan in the 50s gave his famous winds of change, because the winds of change are blowing through Africa. And it basically blew the British flag off of the African continent. And so everybody was like, well, I guess we're just going to give them another piece. And Margaret Thatcher was like, the fuck we are. We're going to fight. There's British people there. The Argentinians are putting them in prison camps. We're not going to allow it. We're going to get the Marines. We're going to get the Royal Air Force. We're just going to go. We're going to kick their ass. And they did. They sent a flotilla of British ships, and they sailed down to Argentina. They blew the shit out of some Argentine submarines with some fighter pilots. They landed the Royal Marines on the Falklands, and they liberated them. They marched in there, and they killed those Argentine bastards. And the fallout from the collapse of the Falkland War led to the beginning of the end of the Argentine military dictatorship, which had launched the war in part to distract from the fact that their only government policies seemed to be shooting and killing people that didn't agree with them, which is not sustainable in the long run.
Karen do you think that she would have gotten all of the taking milk away from Timmy Black if she wasn't kind of genuine?
Yes and no. It was, part of it was also that she was a woman, so it was sort of seen as like, how could you take, you? But also, I think it played into this already. You know, what I mean, if she was like sort of like an Obama or like a Jimmy Carter type, where she was like kinder, gentler, hug it out, like feelings kind of guy, it would have been harder to portray her as heartless and cruel. But it was easy to portray her as heartless and cruel because she kind of didn't give a shit what people thought, right? I mean, she kind of was, somewhat brusque, and and she only seemed to display real warmth with her husband Dennis, Dennis Thatcher, who she met. He took her from a Tory conference to the train from Essex. He was like, oh, I'll give you a ride. And she met him there, and he was a businessman. He was a wealthy man. And it sort of, she loved him, and they had a very British marriage. It was like, he's always wearing a suit, she's always wearing a dress, and they're always proper, even on like, Sunday morning or whatever. She really loved him, and he really loved her, and she sort of, kind of let her guard down around him, but the rest of the time she displayed this almost icy haughtiness. And so the taking milk away from Timmy thing with the Minister of Education, like, it really was, it played it when you sort of told people the story, they're like, well, that makes sense because she is awful, am I right? Like, look at all this other stuff she's done, look at the speeches she gets, right? And to be totally fair, when you adopt the nickname the Iron Lady, I mean, that's the last person to be called the Man of Iron was Stalin. So it's like, like it's not a nickname about how much you like hugging people or whatever, right? And so the Falklands say, and it was a huge moment for the British. They went down there and they kicked those Argentinians' ass, and it was amazing, right? It was huge. And we helped them out. We cooperated, which of course she never forgot that Ronald Reagan. He wasn't like, "Don't do this. This isn't you do what." He was like, "No, you got to do what you got to do. Like, we're going to stay out of your way." And they were terrified that the Argentinian submarines were going to sink a British ship full of Royal Marines. They were like, "Oh God, the Royal Marines are gonna, they're like 2,000 of them are gonna die, and it's gonna be their names are gonna be in the Daily Mail or the Guardian or whatever." And it didn't happen. They kind of they later admitted they basically got lucky. The Argentinians missed their chance. And so there's great writing about it by the British military reporter and writer Max Hastings, who was one of the guys that hired Boris Johnson, and later admitted regretting it, if you follow British politics. But he wrote a really good book about his time. He was a reporter for, I think, The Guardian, and he was ashore with the Royal Marines and wrote about it. And they really, I mean, they went right in there and they fought the Argentinians and they defeated them, and it was a big deal. And so everything kind of began to turn around for Margaret Thatcher. Right. On the one hand, she fought the miners in 1985, and she won. She won. The miners backed down, accepted a huge list of demands. The British economy turned around, and Margaret Thatcher was there to say, "Look, we've had 6 years of my policies, right? And we've turned it around, right? The economy's growing, unemployment's down, the savings rate is up, the inflation is down, the economy's growing. It's like like my policy, Thatcherism worked, and so it was a huge moment for her. Like the corner had been turned, and that got her another 5 years in office. The second 5 years were a little harsher, right? On the one hand, she had some triumphs. We'll talk about it. On the other hand, the poll tax never went away. It was this sort of bleeding ulcer in her prime ministership that never, she never backed off of it, because that would be to admit defeat and weakness. And the more she tried to implement it, the worse it got, right? And she was never able to shake this sort of unpopularity among most of the country at large. There were a lot of people who really admired her policies, but nobody liked her. She was just not a likable person. She didn't have any, likability. You don't have to be likable to be a good prime minister, but you kind of have to be likable to be prime minister, right? Or to stay being prime minister. And she was none of those things, right? And so the other thing we ought to mention is Europe, right? Margaret Thatcher, the European Economic Community, okay, the European Coal and Steel Community had started as an agreement between Britain and France to pool steelmaking in the 60s. And it emerged in the 70s to be the European Economic Community, where a bunch of countries had begun to drop tariff barriers and freedom of movement stuff. And by the 80s, it was essentially on its way to becoming the European Union. And Margaret Thatcher really decided that she was sort of ambivalent about it at first, but she really wanted to. She forced a vote, basically, and so she basically forced the British people to say, "Look, are we part of Europe or not?" And by a narrow majority, the British voted to join the European Economic Community, and as a consequence, stayed in the European Union when it formed. And it was a huge moment. I mean, the European Union was what it was in part because the British were involved, and it was a big deal. Now, on the other hand, this, of course, it foreshadows the 2016 Brexit vote. By the end of her tenure as prime minister, Margaret Thatcher sort of disliked the European Union intensely. She always viewed it as a fundamentally undemocratic enterprise, and she always thought that it was a backdoor for genuine European unification. And she didn't like that. She didn't like that they sort of, you never knew what you were getting. You always sort of sold a bill of goods, right? You're always sort of, it was like you're getting A and it's actually B, right? And so by the end of her career, she's a pretty firmly committed Eurosceptic, which of course matters a lot, because the single most important prime minister of recent British past is deployed frequently by the modern Tories to support 2016's Brexit, right, and the subsequent Brexit agenda, right? And of course, in British politics since 2015 has been about one thing: Brexit and nothing else. It's Brexit, 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 and it's been the degree to which the British were successful in handling it was all that mattered. And of course, it's a giant fucking fiasco on the biggest order. There's not been a government policy that's been more important and more screwed up by a government since Hitler declared war on the Soviet Union, right? And the second British prime minister to be a woman, Theresa May, I would describe her as an utter and complete, absolute, total failure on the order of Crystal Pepsi, because she failed to deal with Brexit. We like Crystal Pepsi? All right, well, takes all kinds. It was super sweet. Yeah, also it's Pepsi, so cheers. I mean, look, the Pepsi Cola company has a warm place in my heart because they produce Dr. Pepper, the king of all sodas. It's a separate thing, but it's bottled by Pepsi. So yeah. So no, it's in Texas actually. Unfortunately, my least favorite U.S. senator living, I should say, least favorite U.S. senator Ted Cruz. Actually, he has a Dr. Pepper vending machine in his Senate office, which if you it's still British territory. Yeah, they still British territory. Yeah. Okay, bye, Karen. Cheers. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. You're great. Comment with topic suggestions. Please join us later. Also, don't go to work on Saturday nights. She works on Saturday nights. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. But he has if you go to Ted Cruz's office, he has a Dr. Pepper vending machine that just push a button and it gives you Dr. Pepper. And Dr. Pepper, they stock it. Like they have a guy who comes every week, whatever, to just put Dr. Pepper in Ted Cruz's office. So you can come and drink Dr. Pepper and Ted Cruz. And it's like I would want to go there and be like, I hate your face. Give me the Dr. Pepper. Have you met the guy? Have you seen the guy? Like, it's Ted Cruz. Like, My favorite quote by a senator, Lindsey Graham, said, "If you shot Ted Cruz in the Senate, and the trial was in the Senate, no one would vote to convict you because no one hates him so much." And I was like, "Wow, Lindsey Graham."
Yeah,
Boom.
whatever.
He said that on CNN's Sunday morning
you
show.
can't trust anything Lindsey Graham said.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, nobody likes. But he said that on CNN about. It was before 2016. Yeah. But he was like, because that was when Ted Cruz was partnering with the Senate Conservative Fund to run attack ads targeting sitting senators for votes that like Ted Cruz helped to get them to cast. And so like Ted Cruz, this outside conservative group was running attack ads against you in your state, quoting Ted Cruz saying bad things about you. And Ted Cruz was like, I don't know, whatever. And it was like like you're in that group, like you're in that, like you helped them. And so it was Ted Cruz. Um, you went on, and he's got the weird mutton chop beard. It's like just grow a beard or shave your beard like the rest of us. He's not the right person. Hugh Jackman is yeah. Would accept also some 19th century president John Quincy Adams had mutton chops a little bit. I mean, if we don't like John Quincy Adams, we're gonna have a problem because he's the best, and I love him uncritically. Hard disagree. And so I mean, that's true. That's Margaret. We've got to talk about Margaret Thatcher's other thing. Oh my God. Okay, so just as the '80s are beginning to turn into a shit show for her, what happens is the Soviet Union really begins to undergo this kind of comprehensive process of just turning into a shithole more than it had been. And the Russians put Mikhail Gorbachev in charge, and Gorbachev signals his willingness to kind of negotiate with the West. And he adopts two policies: perestroika and glasnost. Perestroika is this idea that like they're gonna if I remember, perestroika was rapprochement with the West, and glasnost was openness, where they were gonna like not repress anybody for publishing books anymore, and they're not gonna like put anybody in work camps, and they're not gonna like jail anybody for criticizing the government or whatever, right? And so Gorbachev genuinely believed in communism and wanted to reform it because he's a nice guy but also a dumbass. Um, but Margaret Thatcher was basically the intermediary that got Reagan and Gorbachev together. And the thing about Reagan is everybody remembers Reagan as being this tough guy who was like Red Dawn, let's fight the Russians, whatever. But actually, if you want to remember Reagan for a movie, it wasn't Red Dawn, the heroic story of the high school kids fighting communism until the army comes and defeats the commies, which is, by the way, is an excellent movie. Is an incredible performance by Patrick Swayze, and also what's her name, Leah Thompson. It was and the remake they made with Thor in it was just shitty and we shouldn't mention it. What? He's but yeah, not for it. But it said this the day after. The day after was a movie they made about a nuclear attack in Kansas. It was a nuclear war and it blows up Kansas City, and it realistically portrayed the aftermath of a nuclear strike based on, in fact, classified government documents that they had gotten declassified and they used. And Reagan saw it, and it basically scared the shit out of him, which was kind of the point, right? It was like sort of the point of the movie. And so, in a consequence, Reagan was like, we can't actually have a nuclear war. And so he met Gorbachev a bunch of times and basically negotiated an end to the Cold War based on the idea that we would. What are you staring at? What was happening in the window?
Somebody walked past the window.
All right, well, it's wild. And so that was sort of the thing that Reagan did, was he basically met Gorbachev and he told Gorbachev, look, if you try to reform the Soviet Union to make it a less shitty country, we will not take advantage of that in order to attack you with nuclear bombs, right? Like we won't, if you stumble, we're not going to like push you down, right? And Gorbachev said it was the reassurances he got from Reagan that he would not be willing to start a nuclear war that allowed him to go ahead with the reform of Soviet society, which of course eventually, as de Tocqueville said, whenever any autocracy attempts to reform itself, it is at its most vulnerable because people don't want a little reform, they want all of it fixed now. They want it to just go. Which is the same thing you saw in East Germany and this Eastern Europe in the Soviet the 90s with like East Germany, Poland, and stuff. Where as soon as there was this idea that like we don't have to live like this, like it's going to be 1% better. It was like, why can't it be 87% better, right? Why can't we just get rid of all this stupid crap, right? And so, and of course, Erich Honecker and Enver Hoxha and all Ceausescu and all those guys are too stupid to know anything about that because you have to be a dumbass to be a communist dictator. Well, I mean, no, the movie is The Day After, which has, among others, John Lithgow. What's that? Is he also in it? Yeah, and it was, yeah, but again, like, cannot overestimate how much I enjoy Red Dawn, but it did not have the effect on Reagan that The Day After did, which was really. If you like movies, you can find on YouTube Threads, which was a British movie about the same thing, about what it would be like in Britain after nuclear war, and they made it and it was really good, and the British government saw it and was like, holy shit, we can't air that on TV, like it'll scare the shit out of people. And so they just buried it until the 90s when they ran it on like BBC in the middle of the night. And so Threads is basically the British version of The Day After, right? And so Thatcher really served as an intermediary that got Reagan and Gorbachev together, and she sort of stuck by him and gave Reagan some diplomatic cover with the Europeans, which allowed the Cold War to end in the way that it did, which is to say, an amazing turn of events peacefully, right? I mean, the Cold War ended without nuclear weapons, without a fire shot. The entirety of Eastern Europe overthrew communism without, the only shots that were fired were the ones that they used to kill Ceausescu. Right. By the way, fun fact: you can watch on YouTube the execution of Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. They have the trial with him and Elena, and he's all like, "I don't accept it." They're like, "Shut the hell up, you monster!" And then they take him outside and they put him up against the wall, and she's yelling at them and crying. And then the camera pans away, but you can hear the AK-47s, and then the cameraman shows them dragging the bodies away. And so you can Google it; it's on YouTube, which is fantastic. Right? Nobody deserved to get shot in the face in front of a brick wall more than Nicolae Ceausescu. If you published a scientific article in Romania during the life of Elena Ceausescu, you were required to list her as a co-author. Yeah, for reasons. Just because.
So you spent 40 minutes.
Okay, whatever. Margaret Thatcher. So again,
also submits for your consideration the glorious facial hair of General Ambrose Burnside.
I mean, that's where we get sideburns, and there was a lot of things that were not glorious about Ambrose Burnside. For example, his career in the Army of the Potomac. His facial hair was top tier. He may not have been a 5-star general, but his facial hair was 5-star, right? And so, yeah, and we're all thinking here about that 1862 winter campaign in Fredericksburg where he got his ass kicked. If you've ever seen Burnside's Bridge, the battlefield of Fredericksburg, only a moron would lead a frontal attack across Burnside's Bridge, and he did. But you can blame McClellan, who was his commander at the battle. But yeah, when you think of great facial hair, there are a few people who I would think of before Ambrose Burnside. There's no question. It's just the best. And so what else can you say about Margaret Thatcher, right? She really served as this great bridge, and her later life was quite sad. She got out of office in 1990. She gets succeeded by John Major, who was basically a Ponce, and he gets overturned immediately by Tony Blair, who New Labor. They just like Bill Clinton in the 90s with the Democrats, the New Democrats. Tony Blair. That's what I'm saying. Tim is waving around a picture of Ambrose Burnside. Tony Blair did New Labor, and he basically pivoted Labor away from hard left to the more moderate thing. It worked for a while until it didn't work, both in the case of Clinton and Blair. But her legacy has been sort of controversial because the Tories, the modern Tory party is really her party. But on the other hand, she's not a very popular, she's not like FDR or Reagan or somebody that you can sort of say like, oh, this is our kind of leader and everybody likes her. I mean, she's not a likable person, right? She herself, Dennis died, he had heart problems, I want to say, in the 90s, I want to say. She died, I want to say, it was like 2013 or 2014. She suffered a stroke, and she had in the waning years of her life, she was afflicted with really serious dementia. And her kids, she never had a great relationship with her kids. She had, I think, 2 kids. And she was, she was kind of alone throughout the latter part of life. It was sort of sad. But of course, again, I mean, that was the wages of being this kind of uncompromising, sort of stern person. Was, she didn't have a huge family. Wasn't very close with her kids. I mean, that was what it was. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And do you want the next topic?
Yeah, I'm gonna have some cheese balls. Well, I'm gonna have a shot first, and then maybe some cheese balls after the shot.
I don't know how you. Yeah, but I don't know how you combine these flavors.
Because cheese balls is great. So. No, it's it's all right.
All right, so you want the next topic?
Yeah, what's the next topic?
The next topic is Stalingrad.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And let's try not to be 45 minutes.
I mean, it's Stalingrad. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. Somebody asked for that a while. I think it was Mary Woodring. I don't know if you should remember Mary Woodring's brother. Yeah. So, all right. Somebody asked about Stalingrad. We talk about Stalingrad pretty quick. Stalingrad's a battle in World War II. It's in many respects the climactic battle in in the middle of the war where the tide sort of irrevocably turns against. Is he trying to come out? Okay, because if he's trying, I mean, he can just go. I don't want him to think he can't. He can walk out that way. It's fine. Yeah. So anyway, it's 1942, and in a way, the tide begins to turn in both the Pacific and in the European theater because of these two battles, Midway and Stalingrad. Midway, summer 1942, American Navy defeats the Japanese Navy. Huge battle, amazing thing. With one stroke, the tide had been turned. The Japanese said. So Stalingrad. Hitler invades 1941, summer 1941. Hitler invades the Soviet Union. It was always the point of the thing. You had to defeat the Jewish Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union. They were the existential threat to Germany. You needed Lebensraum in the East, living space for all the German people. You had to defeat this sort of irrevocably hostile power that you had temporarily made an alliance with. And so in 1941, Hitler had great success in the Soviet Union. The German armies pushed all the way to Moscow. They laid siege to Leningrad for 3 years, uninterrupted. They pushed all the way to the east to Moscow and then south. They were defeated temporarily by the Russians. Battle of Moscow, winter 1941. But in 1942, the fighting continued. And what Hitler did is he split his armies into three sort of lobes, and he put one north, one south, one center, right? And the Southern Army was the one that was making progress, and that was the one he reinforced in the summer of 1942 and pushed further south and east. And by the late summer, they had arrived at the city of Stalingrad. Stalingrad is on the Volga River. The Volga River runs roughly north and south through most of Russia. It had been used in the Middle Ages by Vikings as a route to get from the Scandinavia down into the Caspian and the Black Sea. There was a portage between the Dnieper and the Don and the Volga, where they actually pushed their boats across a little road that they made to get them into the sea. And so the city itself was named Tsaritsyn. It was renamed Stalingrad in the Civil War, after the Civil War, when Stalin's son, he died in the Civil War fighting there, and they renamed it in his honor. Exciting things happening. And so it became sort of named for Stalin. And so it's on the west bank of the Volga River. It runs roughly north and south. And there's a few things of importance there. There's the Barricade Ironworks. There's a Red October tractor factory, and there's a lot of workers' housing and stuff in the city, right? And so Hitler attacked Stalin to get access to there's a chemical plant and all this other stuff. But at the same time, it was sort of also, it became this symbolic thing where Hitler attacked the city, and the Russians like stubbornly defended it, and instead of retreating like they had been doing for most of 1941. And so it was one of those things where the more Hitler defended it, the more Stalin attacked it. Yes.
Okay, we lost it for a second. So go back and.
Are we good now though?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And so the more that Hitler attacked the city, the more Stalin defended it. What?
Well, that explains why he's
Oh.
already broken.
It's fine. Whatever. It's fine. And so whatever, I do what I want. Believe in yourself, you can accomplish your dreams. I'm living proof.
Okay, this is the sound of you cheering.
Okay. So it became this kind of prestige thing. For Hitler to lose Stalingrad would be an admission that he wasn't capable of conquering Russia. For Stalin to win, it would become this symbolic victory. It was named for him, right? And so the commander of the army in Stalingrad was a guy named Vasily Zhukov, and basically Stalin told him, "You must win, not one step back. You have to win. You get whatever you want." And so Zhukov deployed the Russian soldiers, as ingenious as he could, and in fact, they ordered the civilian population of Stalingrad to stay in the city. And so the Germans bombed the city, and they put them in the sewers and the cellars. They kept them in place for the entire battle. Pretty much. And so the Russian Sixth Army attacks Stalingrad in the winter of 1942. They capture it. The Russians are driven across the east bank of the Volga River, and some of the scenes are just indescribable. At one point, the Russians are sending guys across on ferries into the teeth of German aircraft fire, and they're like landing right into the machine guns on the beach. It's like D-Day all over again, or D-Day in foreshadowing. And so what the Russians did is they allowed the Germans to hold Stalingrad, and they put pressure on them in the city, and then they pushed to the north and west and to the south and west, and they surrounded the city of Stalingrad, and they cut the German Sixth Army off from its reinforcements and its supplies. And they surrounded it and basically pounded it into smithereens, right? And the German soldiers trapped in the city called it der Hexenkessel, the witch's cauldron. And what the Germans did is they basically fortified the city, but the Russians block by block by block forced them into a smaller and smaller and smaller area. And of course, then they began to gain air superiority, push the Luftwaffe back, and they began to bomb the German-held parts of the city. Artillery began to move in. Ominously, the Germans only were able to move in supplies by air in the winter of 1942. And the Russians would, one of the things the Russians did was the Germans would land a plane, unload the supplies, they would load the plane full of wounded guys, and the Russians would blow the plane up and kill everybody. And then they would drag the plane out of the way, repave the runway, land another plane, move in the supplies, load it full of wounded guys, the Russians would blow the plane up. And the German Air Force Minister Hermann Goering famously told Hitler, like, of course we could we could build a beachhead, we could build an air road that will just take supplies directly into Stalingrad. And the Russians just blew the shit out of it. It was never going to work. And so in the teeth of this incredible winter weather, the Russians launched this massive encirclement and then a push into the city, Operation Uranus, the name for the planet. They did another one called Neptune that we know nothing about because they deleted all of the records because it failed. That was in like 1943. And by the beginning of 1943, the Germans were trapped in this increasingly sort of small section of the city. When the winter broke, the Russians just resumed this sort of awful, inexorable, horrific advance, and the increasingly beleaguered German defenders, like they had no ammunition, they couldn't get food, they didn't have any medical supplies, they couldn't evacuate their wounded, there was sort of nothing they could do. And the fighting, the Russian soldiers called Stalingrad, they said it's the Stalingrad Academy of Street Fighting. Everyone who goes is enrolled. The matriculation time is 2 weeks, and there's a 75% chance no one completes their course because you die. And they had this sort of grim kind of sense of humor about it. And by the way, the Russians discovered they got issued an entrenching tool as a shovel. And they discovered it was flat. And if you sharpened the shovel and you threw it, it would travel about 10 to 15 feet. And it was so heavy, if you hit a guy in the neck, it would sever his spinal cord and kill him. And so that was everybody practiced throwing the shovel. And when you snuck up to the German soldiers, the first guy would throw the shovel and kill a guy silently. And then everybody would rush in and shoot guns. And so the fighting was three-dimensional. It was in the streets, in the sewers, in apartment buildings, across rooftops. There was one Russian, a bunch of guys that defended an entire apartment building in central Stalingrad for months. They fortified every window. They reinforced everything with concrete. And the Germans were never able to capture the building because they kept attacking it, and the Russians kept defending it. Sometimes they would fight in stairwells of apartment buildings up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was just the fighting was indescribably brutal and awful. And when the Sixth Army eventually, by the spring, it could not sustain the fighting. They didn't have ammunition, medical supplies. And so finally, Hitler promoted the commander of the German Sixth Army, General von Paulowitz, to field marshal. And then he gave a radio address where he said, no German field marshal in the history of Germany has ever surrendered. Sort of hint, hint. And Paulowitz surrendered not long after. And he surrendered to the basement of an Univermag department store in downtown Stalingrad. And the Russians sent a second lieutenant, like a 16-year-old kid, who took his surrender. And Paolo marched into captivity with like a couple 100,000 German soldiers. And so the defeat at Stalingrad was massive. It stopped the German army in the south of Russia forever. They didn't get the Caspian oil fields that they were ostensibly headed towards. And it was almost, for the first time, there had been a huge defeat. Every other defeat for Germany up to this point in the war had been like a pause, right? Like, we got stopped, but don't worry, we're going to start again when the winter breaks, when the weather's better, when we whatever. But this was for the first time like an outright actual defeat. And Hitler came on the radio. Everybody in Germany heard it. They played a funeral march by Wagner, and he came on the radio and gave like a 30-second speech where he said, it didn't go the way that Stalingrad would be on it, or blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's it. And nobody really knew what he was talking about. But of course, if you asked around, people, the casualties were bad. The hospitals were getting all these wounded men. People were getting, anybody whose son or brother or husband or father or cousin was deployed to the Eastern Front, they were getting letters about they were died, they were not coming back. And so people began to realize, like, we're not actually winning the war, right? Like, you had to really add two and two together, and you had to do it in the privacy of your home. But Stalingrad was the first moment that many Germans really began to realize, like, this isn't actually going that well, right? Like, we were winning, and now it doesn't look like we are. And for the Russians, that was sort of the point where they began to advance, right? After Stalingrad in the spring of 1943, the Russians stopped getting pushed east, and they started marching west, right? And so if the rest of 1943, they recaptured territory that had been lost to them. And in 1944, they actually attacked for the first time after D-Day. A couple weeks after we landed in France, they began to attack out of Russian territory into territory like Poland and stuff occupied by the Germans. And so they began to attack out. And so Stalingrad was really the point where the German tide hit, and the tide began to go back out. And it was this almost indescribably brutal battle. Now, today you can go to Stalingrad. It's called Volgograd. They changed the name. You can go there. You can see some of the stuff. You can go to the Barricade tractor factory, The Red October tractor factory, the barricaded ironworks are still there, and you can see the machine gun stuff, and they kept a bunch of the stuff the same, but it's pretty. It's also really far out there. You got to take a plane from like Kiev, I guess maybe, or like a train from Moscow. Would be like 10 hours on the train or something. It's really, really, really way the fuck out there. But you can still go see it. And Stalingrad is important because it was the first major battle that was really fought inside a big industrialized city. It was this first time city warfare became a thing. And so we should mention, by the way, some great depictions of it. I want to say it was William Craig wrote a good book called War of the Rats. The classic history of Stalingrad is Anthony Beevor's The Fateful Siege. It's a great book. Vasily Grossman, who was a really, really stellar, he was a Jewish man. He was also a Russian journalist for Red Star, was the Russian Armed Forces newspaper, and he wrote 2 books about World War II: Life and Fate and Stalingrad. And the Germans censored Stalingrad, so he wrote Life and Fate, and they censored that too. Or excuse me, the Russians censored it. And when they censored Life and Fate, they actually took the typewriter he wrote it on and the ribbons that had the letters, the ink letters on. But both of those books were about, he said, they're about the 2 worst things I saw during World War II, which are also the 2 worst things I can imagine. He said Stalingrad and Auschwitz. And he said he was with the Red Army throughout Stalingrad. He marched all the way with the Red Army to Berlin. He liberated Auschwitz with the Red Army. He was there when they found the ovens that were still hot to the touch, and they found the barracks full of all the corpses, and they found the starving people. And they told the Americans about this death factory, and we sort of didn't believe them. We thought, gosh, that's Russian propaganda. And so afterwards, Grossman was like, those are the 2 worst things I could even imagine. And then all of the years that we saw the war, those were the 2 worst things. And so he said that was what I had to write about. Was the experience of people fighting in Stalingrad and living through it, and then going to Auschwitz and then dying. And I would argue that in a way, Life and Fate is the classic novel of World War II. It is sort of this testament about the Russian experience, which was just brutal and unforgiving in the extreme. And both have been published in English in really good translation. Stalingrad for the first time. Stalingrad was never published until 2 years ago. Or last year in its entirety. So those are just excellent books. And he later wrote a short story collection called Everything Flows, which was not censored by the Russian government because he sort of made it so that they wouldn't censor it. But I would argue Grossman is really one of the underrated reporters, sort of storytellers of the Russian war against the Germans, right? But so Stalingrad it was a battle almost indescribable in its ferocity, and it leveled a major city and killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. There's no question. So Stalingrad. Was that faster?
Yes, that's
Okay.
can we talk about Istanbul?
Istanbul is not. The city is properly named Constantinople. That is the name of it. It's called Constantinople.
How about Chernobyl?
Chernobyl. Another topic I think that Stephanie was interested in. Okay, so Chernobyl. So Chernobyl's is in the 80s, right? It's not all electronic punk and new wave music for you. So Chernobyl is a nuclear reactor. It's actually a nuclear power facility in Ukraine. The reactor that we care about is the Jupiter reactor, which is the one that goes bad. These kids, man, they should play basketball all day. Damn.
Look, the weather's finally cool enough to enjoy it.
No, they need to go in and play video games like regular kids. That's what I'm saying. Okay. And so we care about the Jupiter reactor, and the town that's nearby where a lot of the workers live is a town in Ukraine called Pripyat, right? Pripyat. And so what happens, and you have to look up the date because I don't know I can't remember the date that the Chernobyl incident happens. But what happens? What's that? You went to the bathroom or something. And so I want to say it was 1987, but I think that's too late.
Saturday, the 26th of April.
Boom, 1986, nailed it. And so, nailed it. So Cam Radio 12. And so, what can we say about Chernobyl? Okay. The thing about Chernobyl is that it is this perfect storm of, like, in order for the thing to happen the way it did, everything had to go wrong, and it did. There was a whole series of failures in the reactor, and I think they were like testing a new safety system or something. And so they took some stuff offline, and then there was like an error, and there was like another error, and the guy that they needed was like not available, and somebody else was like out sick. And so it was like 100 things had to go wrong for the thing to fail, and they all did. It was horrible. And as a result, the other thing we can mention is that the reactor goes critical, right? The reactor fails. It starts releasing radiation to the atmosphere. It undergoes like a meltdown. And the Russian government basically had no way to handle it. Their way to handle it was basically to send in guys wearing, like not very effective anti-radiation suits into the reactor to sort of handle it. And all these, they sacrificed a number of people's lives. And the radiation plume like into the atmosphere. And eventually they get it under control by dumping a ton of concrete onto it and just sealing the reactor up. But the consequence, and the irony is, the term I was going to use is fallout. The fallout from Chernobyl is immense, right? The first thing is you can't hide it. This isn't some crazy industrial accident in some city in the middle of fucking Russia that nobody even knows about, like Gorky 17 or like Norilsk or something. Norilsk is a city in central eastern Siberia that is it's an industrialized city. And by the way, Norilsk contains the northernmost mosque in the entire universe, entire America, entire world. I've had several shots. Leave me alone. And so if you want a mosque that's closest to the Arctic Circle, you go to Norilsk. And also, one of the members of Pussy Riot, Nadezhda Tolokonikova, is from Norilsk and actually immigrated from Norilsk to Moscow to get an education a few years ago. It was like 20 years. And so, like Norilsk is so heavily polluted with heavy metals that one geologist said, you don't need to mine anything in Norilsk. You could just dig up the topsoil. Like you could just run the topsoil through like an ore processor, and you could get like palladium and like vanadium and stuff out of it, right? And so like you can hide shit like that. Nobody knows. This is the 80s, right? I mean, like nobody knows, right? They dam the Aral Sea and it turns the Aral Sea into a giant fucking desert, and like the entire environment of Kazakhstan changes because there's no ocean there anymore. Nobody knows that. But Chernobyl releases a bunch of radioactivity in the atmosphere, and everybody in Western Europe is like, boy, that's a lot of radioactivity in the fucking atmosphere. Wow. And of course, even more than anything else, like it's the Cold War. We're like a little on the alert for radioactivity, right? Like it's sort of, we're all kind of paying attention. And so it's like the Swedes and the Germans are all like, boy, like that's a lot. And the Russians are like, that ain't shit. I don't know what you're talking about. Probably it's a lie. And so they just sort of, their typical attitude is just, it's nothing, shut up. No, it's not. Stop asking. No, shut down. No questions. Meh. And it just doesn't work, right? I mean, it's like you see your neighbor's house and it bursts into flames, and you're like, hey, and they're like, I don't, just stop asking. It's nothing. Stop asking questions. And it's like, okay, first of all, I can see that, and second of all, like your house is gonna catch my fucking house on fire, right? Like, you don't care. And the plume of radioactivity goes all the way to Western Germany. And in West Germany, by the way, so many cows got irradiated that they had to actually shoot all the cows because they were giving irradiated milk. They had to euthanize a whole bunch of cows because they couldn't. They were like, well, sorry, Bessie gives irradiated milk, so like, like.
Could have had so many superheroes.
Well, I mean, or like kids with leukemia. I mean, just like throwing it out there, right? It's not, it's like in Fallout in the video game series, radiation makes you get big and mean, and like in reality, what radiation makes you get is super sick and dead, right? And so as a consequence, like the Russians like can't hide this. They can't like cover it up. It's like it's just not a thing. And so Gorbachev is forced to kind of publicly admit that there's a problem. And it's this huge turning point in the entire internal history of the Soviet Union that the Soviet government actually has to go on TV, and Gorbachev has to be like, okay, there's this reactor accident in Chernobyl and Pripyat, and like we're kind of handling it, and like it's going to be contained, but like we have really, it is like have some consequences. And never before has the Soviet Union made an admission of failure. And remember, the Soviet Union is like, its history is a history of failure, right? I mean, like the economy wasn't very good. They had a whole series of other catastrophes in the last couple of decades. They're busily losing a war in Afghanistan, and so for the Russian government to like publicly admit failure, it's like opening a dam, right? It's like, oh, so you admitted that Chernobyl's bullshit. Like, what else are you going to tell? You can tell us about how Afghanistan is going, or you can tell us about how the space race is going, and you can tell us about the nuclear arms race, or what other failures have you been hiding, right? And so. It was this huge moment where the Russian government had to publicly admit to the entire world that they simply had made a series of poor decisions, and they were not, like it was, you couldn't hide it, right? It was like 3 Mile Island in the United States, where it was like this huge catastrophe that turned out to be nothing, but at the same time, it was like, the government felt that it had a responsibility to tell people, if you live within 10 miles of 3 Mile Island, you may want to leave. and as a consequence, millions of people fled. And so all of a sudden, there was this national debate about like nuclear power: is it horrible or not? Right? And the Russians sort of forced this. And the other thing is, nuclear reactors are serious. So does anyone really comfortable with the Russians having them? Like the Soviets, the Russia, and everybody was kind of like, you know. And so, having said that, what are the consequences inside of Pripyat? Well, I mean, in Pripyat, is there a question?
Stephanie wants to know what's 3 Mile Island.
3 Mile Island is a nuclear power plant. I want to say it was in like New York or New Jersey. It's in Jersey, and there was in the 70s. They had a threatened reactor meltdown, and there was a famous novel turned movie called The China Syndrome, where they talked about how the reactor would melt through the entire crust of the Earth and end up in China. And the same what?
That sounds plausible.
Right, and the same kind of thing happened at 3 Mile Island. So the newspaper reporters and stuff were like, oh yeah, it's literally the China Syndrome, like that is happening in the 3 Mile. And so millions of people were told to evacuate. And the government was like, it's probably just stay in your house. And they were like, hey, you know how we told you to stay in your house? Get in your fucking car and go as fast as you can. And so like millions of people evacuated the radius around 3 Mile Island. And so it was this huge like public, the government like couldn't hide it, right? I mean, you can't like, if a reactor is going to blow up and kill like everybody in fucking New York and New Jersey, like holy shit, you can't just like cover that up, right? I mean, you can't just be like, it wasn't a big deal. And so the good news is 3 Mile Island didn't blow up. They fixed it. It's fine, but it put people off nuclear power for decades. Yeah, I mean, Fukushima Daiichi in Japan would make you maybe, and if the Japanese who have like robots and like sex robots and like robotic toilets and shit, if they can't run a fucking nuclear reactor, then who the hell can, right? You really want the Ukrainians or like the North Koreans or like the Malaysians to be building one of these things, or the Russians, for God's sakes? Tim had a question, I think. Fukushima Daiichi, yeah, was for, and Fukushima. I mean, in the sense that they handled it in that like millions of Japanese people poured all of their efforts into fixing it, yes. In the sense that their government is a bunch of super huge assholes who covered it up and lied about it and are incapable of making good choices, no, is the answer to that question. So, and the Japanese thing is like, we'll just get over it. It's stoic. You don't complain. You just do what you have to do. And yet, like, you couldn't. Like, I mean, like, people, like, millions of people got sick and they lost their homes, and and the tsunami was terrible, and it was just, and it was like, it was all just, everything was bad. And the Japanese government, the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party running Japan, has been running it for so long that they don't really give a shit, right? And we should mention, shout out to former Prime Minister of the LDP, Shinzo Abe, who died a couple weeks ago, right? At this point, maybe a month. He died. Yeah, he died. Longest serving. No, that was the guy. That was Yukio Hatoyama, who was before him. Yeah, he had a pompadour, and Yukio Hatoyama's wife was convinced that she'd been abducted by aliens. Is he not dead? Did he quit because he's got heart problems? I think he must have quit then.
I mean, Wikipedia does not have a death.
No, he quit, I guess, because he's just super sick. He's the longest-serving post-war prime minister of Japan, a record only previously held by his dad. But shout out to Shinzo Abe for being a huge jackass and not handling it super great. Yeah, well, he had heart problems, so and also noted apologist for Japanese war criminals, right? But I mean, he was the LDP prime minister, and the LDP is so crazy and corrupt and like sclerotic that they just can't handle problems. They don't. The Japanese sort of don't have an ability to sort of think on their feet. It's just sort of like this: when the tsunami hits you, it's just like, oh well, I guess we should have had a bigger wall, yeah. And so, so back to Pripyat. In a sense, there are these heartbreaking scenes in Pripyat where they basically the Russians come in and they say to everybody, we know we told you it's safe, and we know we told you it's sort of, you can just stay inside, but like, you have to leave. And they basically, in the middle of a day, they evacuated the entire city, and they said, everyone, you have 20 minutes to get on a bus, right? Like, pack your shit, your kid, and like, you're like, well, my kid's at school. Like, we already evacuated the high school. We already got the kids. They're on the bus. And so if you go to Pripyat today, you can actually, in the classrooms, there's just still like books on the tables, and there's like people, like their houses were just full of stuff, and people basically walked in the room, shoved some stuff in a bag, got on a bus, and then left. And Yeah, now it's the background radiation is still relatively serious. You cannot, they will not let you spend the night. Ukraine will not let you spend the night in Pripyat. There's some places they will not let you go. The animals are all radiated, although it's been a huge bird sanctuary because, of course, for 2 decades, for 30 years or whatever, there's not been any people in Pripyat. So for a while, they noticed the animals had cataracts from the radiation, but that's mostly gone away, actually. And there's been a huge wildlife explosion in the area. And there are tours you can go in the nearby town. You can catch a bus, and they will take guides will take you in. They will. The Ukrainian government will not let you go in the buildings because they say it's not the radiation; it's that the buildings have been exposed to the elements for 35 years, and so it's not safe to kind of go in. But the geography of Pripyat's very well known, and there's a famous Ferris wheel in the amusement park in down in Pripyat that was very infamous. And it's been the backdrop of a number of video games. There was a Call of Duty game that featured an extensive Pripyat. Shout out to anybody who's watching who knows the games, the Stalker games, which are a series of novels set in Pripyat, which turned into games set in the town, which exactly have a lot of the geography of they use the base for the games. They actually took maps of Pripyat and turned it into the interior of the game. But you still cannot go in the Jupiter reactor. Fun fact: a bunch of the reactor substance in the Jupiter reactor melted into this horrific slug alien looking blob they call the elephant's foot because it looks like an elephant's foot, and it is a substance previously that did not exist on the surface of the earth because it was formed by this psycho crazy nuclear reaction, and it was apparently so radioactive that they sent a robot to take pictures of it, and the robot malfunctioned, and they shot at it with an AK-47, and it was immune to armor-piercing rifle bullets. And so they speculated that it's some incredibly crazy alloy created by the meltdown of the reactor and the radiation and stuff that was in the Jupiter reactor. There was a really good HBO TV show. Yes, there's been like a dozen. Remember, it was remember Die Hard. It was Die Hard like 5. It was the shitty one where he goes and his kid is in Russia. We saw it in the theater. It was really bad. It takes place in Chernobyl because it's abandoned and so also there was a horror movie where some tourists go and there's monsters or something. Yeah, and then the good thing I want to say was HBO did a mini series. And it was about the immediate aftermath of the reactor failure and the Russian government's handling of it. It was Jared Harris, I think, was one of the guys, British actor who played one of the officials, who was basically like the guy responsible for making the life or death decisions. Yeah, he's in Mad Men. He was the British guy in Mad Men. I every single character in Mad Men, all of the time, I wanted to punch them all in the face as hard as I could for the whole show, and there was no redeeming characters in the entire show. I mean, I guess, yeah, but also I found it's like, do you want to watch a show about everyone you hate? Not really, as it turns out, no. Don Draper is an utter garbage human being, and it was what's his name? It was the Vincent Kartheiser's character, Paul Campbell. I would literally feed him into a meat grinder.
You didn't like him first.
No, I hate his face to begin with, but his character was so unredeemingly awful. Nardog. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I'm just saying, but you're right. Mad Men was a good show and it was well acted. But at the same time, I couldn't stomach watching a show that was full of characters that I would push into a chipper shredder. Christina Hendricks' character notwithstanding, but it was like, you just need to get the fuck out of this place. You need to get on a plane. You need to go to fucking Tahiti. You need to get away from these awful people. It's Constantinople. That's what we call it. In this house, we call it Constantinople. You go to any road, and you go from any road, and you just go on the road, and it will take you to the city. Yeah, so I mean, Chernobyl was a big deal because it revealed fundamentally, it gave everybody a sort of an incredibly unarguable counter to the Russian government. When the Soviet Union was like, "Hey, the Soviet Union is great," it was like, I don't know, fucking Chernobyl, was it that great? And it really, when the Russians were trying to reform the government. And you remember Glasnost and Perestroika, we talked about. Gorbachev suddenly had a reason for those things. Suddenly he had a reason to be open about how the Russian government had failed because of Chernobyl, and it really put a sort of like a nail in the coffin of the Soviet Union as like a government that was effective and competent, right? And it was coming when it did. It was impossible to ignore, and it made it impossible not to argue that the Russian government was, at some level, a failure. right? And so Chernobyl is, and there's a really good book. There's a guy who writes really good books about Ukraine, Sergei Plotky, I want to say, and he wrote To the Gates of Europe is a history of the Ukraine, and a history of the Yalta conference, and he wrote a really good book a couple years ago about Chernobyl. It was really good. And so that's the one I've read. That's the one I have in my library. So what's the next topic?
Bay of Pigs.
Oh God. All right. All right. So it's Cuba. We talk about the Bay of Pigs. Okay. So it's Cuba. Cuba is full of gangsters and sugarcane companies, and the Cubans fucking hate it, but nobody gives a shit. And in the early 50s, the government of Cuba is overthrown, and it's replaced by a guy named Fulgencio Batista. Batista is a pro-American dictator. We like him because he hates commies. He hates commies because that means we'll support him and ignore the shit that he does that's bad. So then, the takeover of Cuba by Fulgencio Batista leads to the formation of a revolutionary movement. It's like the 25th of July movement, or it's named for the date he took over, or whatever. And one of these guys is Fidel Castro, right? Castro gets sort of radicalized by Batista, and Castro. If you go to Miami today, and you mention Castro, the Cubans are like ready to dig his corpse up and shit on it. I mean, they fucking hate this guy. But I mean, Castro's complicated. He starts out as a genuinely reasonable revolutionary who's like, look, if Batista is a dictator, the Americans support him. Like nobody in Cuba likes him, And so with the aid of his friend Ernesto Che Guevara, right, who I don't particularly care for very much because he's a poser and a communist. Guevara and Castro have a revolution in Cuba, and they take over Cuba. And it's the mid 50s in America. It's like 58 in America, and we're not really sure what to do about Castro because like Cuba's 90 miles away from America, so that's bad. It's communist. We hate that. But there's this question about how communist is Castro really? I mean, like how he doesn't seem to be like a doctrinaire super communist, right? The inevitable question that comes up is Castro a Caribbean Tito? When I say Tito, I'm not talking about the member of the Jackson Five, which is a joke I make in class every semester, and nobody gets it because nobody knows the Jackson Five. Like 10 years ago, people used to be like, "Oh," and now all the kids are just like, "Who is the Jackson Five?" And I can't even be like Michael Jackson because, of course, he's passed away as well. And so Tito Puente, no one's gonna know Tito Puente. Right. I mean, I know Tito Puente because he guest starred in The Simpsons, who shot Mr. Burns, and then cut the button. He punches the bongo drum. Right. It's fantastic. But anyway, Tito was the nom de guerre, the alias of a Yugoslav communist named Josip Broz. And during World War II, Broz fought in Yugoslavia, and he tied down a total of 12 German infantry divisions marching around Yugoslavia looking for him. Right? And by the way, 12 infantry divisions is what we landed with at D-Day. The Germans had as many soldiers in Yugoslavia hunting for Tito as we had soldiers landing in France in 1944. And it worked. And Tito was the only communist leader to come to power in Europe after World War II without being put in place by Stalin. Every other communist leader in Eastern Europe, Poland, come on, go that way. Is the door shut, Olivia? Okay, high five. High five. Can you give me a high five? Just you're not on camera. Do it. Do it. Oh my God. Give me a high five. Run and do it. Run and do it. Just you're not on the camera. Give me a high five. Okay. And so it's fine. And so Tito was the only communist leader to come to power not by being put in place by Stalin, right? Everybody else, Czechoslovakia in 1948, Eastern Germany, Poland, Romania, Hungary, all of them were put in place by Stalin. Tito was the only one who could claim that he genuinely led a revolution. And so Tito turned out to be, he hated Stalin. And Stalin hated him because Stalin didn't own him, right? Stalin didn't control Tito. And so that was always the question when you had a communist is this communist a stooge for the Russians or is he independent? Could you, and we negotiated with Tito. We had relations with him, albeit secretive and quiet. And so when Mao takes the power in October of 1949, Mao goes to Beijing. They drive out Chiang Kai-shek. They have a big march through Red Square. He climbs Tiananmen Gate, the Gate of Heavenly Peace that leads into the Forbidden City. And Mao gives it. Everybody's like, "Holy shit! Is this a Chinese Tito?" Can we deal with this guy? And it turns out Mao is Chinese Stalin. Mao is basically like, look, I love Stalin. Here's my favorite picture of Stalin. I love him. Hugs for Stalin. We're going to be a proletarian government. We're going to like lean to the left and whatever. And everybody's like, missed out on that. Right. And so that's what everyone knows about Castro is Castro maybe like a Caribbean Tito, right? And so the Eisenhower administration doesn't take any chances. They wait to see what Castro's like, but they put in plans to kind of like handle Castro. Plan A, we get a dude with a rifle, and the dude just shoots Castro. And everybody's like, okay, so like you can't really like people don't get accidentally shot in the head with 30 caliber rifles, so we're gonna have to like in the butt. So plan B is we get a guy to poison Castro, right? And so sometimes, and this is everyone's experience, sometimes you go to your favorite milkshake vendor and you get a milkshake and you're in Havana and you're having a good time and you drink the milkshake and you just die and you just drop dead and because the milkshake was bad. And I mean, again, that's everyone's experience. That could be a thing that happened to any person, not just a communist dictator who America doesn't like. I don't know why you're looking at me like that. And so they were like, okay, never mind. But then the next plan is great. It was something that they were going to poison his food or whatever. And the mafia had tons of connections in Cuba because the Cuban government, the mafia basically owned the Cuban government. So it worked out great. If you want to smuggle shit into the Western Hemisphere, you got into Cuba and then you like launder money. The mob owned all the casinos in Havana. So you just bring in the drug money to the casino, you launder it through the casino, and then it's just a legitimate profit that you put back into the States, right? You pay taxes on it and everything. And so the mob was super pissed at Castro because he nationalized all those businesses and he took them away from the Americans that owned them and gave them to Cubans. And so the mob, like the Eisenhower administration leaned on its, the mob is like a way to get up. Like the mob knew how to operate in Cuba, right? And so they were the ones that sort of put this together. And Castro's brother, Raul Castro, who is still running Cuba, I think today. No, it's did they give it to the other guy? His name is Miguel Diaz-Canel, I think. They passed it to him, I think, because Raul died too. And so we'll get there because it's exciting. And so the third plan, this is my favorite plan. This is the CI. This is your tax dollars. Here's this. Is it Miguel? Is his name Diaz-Canel? Some shit like that. Yeah, I knew that. Nailed it. And so. And he's like 60 something. So he was for a Cuban leader, it was like, oh my God, a guy who's not 80. Exciting. I mean, for the rate the Cubans live, like 30, 40 years. You know what I'm saying? And so the third plan, and this is your tax dollars work, CIA. The CIA is like, all right, Castro likes to skin dive. All right, you get out there in your bathing suit, you're swimming around the Caribbean, you see he collects shells. You got your snorkel mask on, and you get your fins, your flippy floppies, and then we're gonna get a shell. It's plastic. We're gonna paint it so that it's bright gold and blue, and it sparkles. And then we're gonna put plastic explosive in it. And then Castro's gonna see that shit, and he's gonna be like, "I'm gonna have that shit." And you swim down, and you pick it up, and it's a pressure sensor. And when you pick it up and you swim to the surface, you put it in your pocket, and you swim away. Boom, plastic explosive, kaput, no Castro. And they present this shit to Eisenhower like, bro, we got it handled. And Eisenhower's like, are you fucking kidding me? Right? And so the CIA is like, with another plan. And so the plan they come up with is to send a bunch of Fang.
The door is open.
Fang. No, go to Corey. Okay. Where's Issa? Did you let Issa out?
No.
Did Fang just get out now? The fuck was that? Shit. Did Fang just get out right now? Okay. Yeah, the door's shut. Holy shit. All right, so anyway, okay. It's fine. Everything's fine. We're all fine here. Just Fang to stay. Oh, Fang wants the Chipotle. Fang is like, my admirers are here and I love them and they're my friends. And she shut the goddamn door. Can you shut the door? Go in and shut the door. Okay, come out and then it's fine. Do you want to? Whatever.
I know. What the hell?
Apparently, you need some comfort cheese because of the stress of the dog coming out.
Issa would not stay.
Issa would not stay out here.
Issa will go and just go and then come back later and be like, why the fuck did you not let me in immediately?
Why are you sleeping?
She'll scream, be like, let me in, and it's like, well, you want out? I took her out the other day. I carried her to the lake, and she was like, this is fun. Ding. It was exciting. Everyone, Fang got out. It was rad. It was rad. Olivia was out too, but Corey just wants to hang out with Fang. I know. That's the only reason Corey spends us to hang out with Fang. But Fang is also like, I don't like. You're okay, I guess. And Issa is like, Tim is my favorite, and it's like, you know what? Kind of fuck you. I feed you, clean up your shit. And you throw up on my bed, tapeworms and shit too. What's up, Olivia? Come in. Just don't stand there. Okay, all right. So anyway, Castro, right? So the Eisenhower administration comes up with another plan. The CIA is like, look, there's a lot of fucking Cubans around here that do not like Castro. They fled to all these other countries. They lost their property and shit. There's a bunch in Miami. There's some fucking like the Central America, you know. Oh yeah. Because they all had a lot of businesses and stuff, and they were like, Cubans had business in America, importing and exporting stuff, and so. Yeah, and it was the mob had a whole thing where like the casinos and the hotels, you could easily go from Miami to Cuba, and so there was tons of Cubans that worked in Miami and and a lot of Cubans fled. A lot of Cubans fled to Miami to get away, and they lost property. They lost their businesses. They lost their homes and stuff. It's a shame that Karen had to go work because she suggested this topic. So Karen Lee, her mom is Cuban, in fact. So having said that, the Eisenhower administration comes with this plan to mobilize all these dudes all over the Caribbean and train them into a military force to send them in to overthrow Castro. And the plan doesn't get anywhere before Eisenhower term limited out. And in the 1960 debates for president, it becomes an issue because Democratic Massachusetts Senator JFK runs against incumbent Vice President California Republican Richard Nixon. And in the debate, the first televised presidential debate, it's about foreign policy. Eisenhower attacks Kennedy attacks the Eisenhower administration for not doing anything about Castro. And Nixon is furious because he knows that, in fact, they have done something. They put together this plan to overthrow Castro, but they haven't done anything about it because the plan isn't ready, right? And he knows Kennedy knows about it because Kennedy's on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he got classified briefings about the plan. But of course, Kennedy brings it up in the debate, knowing that Nixon is not about to. What's up, Olivia? Bye. Okay. Just shut the door when you go in the house so that Issa doesn't get out. I'm watching. Just shut it. Just go and shut it. Go in and shut it. You're not going in. Look, if you hang out with Fang, you're getting the tongue in the mouth. He will do it.
Yeah.
Also, I'm not going to lie. Fang does eat his own poop. So that is the thing that happens. Oh my God. So anyway, all right. So and Nixon gets this cheap shot. Kennedy gets this cheap shot off at Nixon, and Nixon is furious. But of course, he can't say anything. You can't be like, "Fuck you, you asshole." You know we have a classified plan. Like you have to be like, "Oh, we're just gonna look at that or whatever." So Kennedy's president is 1961, right? It's 1961. And so Kennedy goes ahead with the plan, and all through 1961, the CIA plans this plan, right? They plan it. And the plan, okay, this is the best part about the Bay of Pigs. The plan, I have a book about the Bay of Pigs, really good book. And the guy argues that when you study the Bay of Pigs, it's actually important to study it in terms of decision-making theory and game theory and planning and organizational management, because the Bay of Pigs is how not to plan a thing, right? So the guys are training in Nicaragua or some shit. They call themselves Brigade 2506 because they all get numbers. That we get these guys together, we get them numbers, and we give them a bunch of World War II surplus gear because there's tons of that shit around. And one guy died. What's that? Yeah, well, I mean, whatever, right? It's probably fine. And one guy died in an accident, and so they named themselves after his number. He was number 2506, so they're Brigade 2506, right? And so, having said that, by the way, they're in Nicaragua or some shit, and at one point the Nicaraguan government thinks that we're trying to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. And the Nicaraguan government, legit, the ambassador comes to America and is like, did we piss you off or something? Is there something we did? Could we, I mean, could you just be we don't, we'll stop or what? And the government is it's the Nicaraguan government to the American ambassador thing. And he's like, he has no idea. And finally, the CIA station chief has to be like, "Shit is fine. Like it's fine. Like don't." Yeah, like just don't tell anybody. Fang for Fang to go for Fang. Okay, Fang. Okay, Fang is the Fang.
Yep.
Make sure Issa's inside too. Yeah. Cause Fang got out. It's Fang. He's a good Fang. Right. He's fine. He's too old to go far or fast anyway. So anyway, because at one point, a few years ago, he got out and he just like took a run and was like gone for like an hour. Yeah, it was a couple times he got out. Once he got out when Olivia was taking a nap, and he just came and knocked on the door and was like, "Scratch, scratch, scratch. I'm cool. Like I'm chilling out." And once you were coming home from work or going to work or something, and he just got out and was just like, "This is exciting. I'm just excited. I'm just having a good time. Just smelling my stuff." So running down the street. Yeah, but Bodhi's our number one fan, so it's cool. He's my boy. So he's excited. I see him like 3 times a week, and he's still like, "Oh my god, I love you so much." And like when I talk to Yiffy in the yard, he like shoves his face in the window and is like, "I know you. You're my friend." Yeah. So all right. So they get these guys in like Nicaragua, and they're training them. And this is the fucking CIA, by the way, right? The CIA legit hires prostitutes from Brazil to come in and sexually service these guys. And the reason is that, of course, these men need to be sexually serviced because whatever, right? But you can't hire Spanish-speaking prostitutes because these men would be revealed as Cuban, like it would be a whole thing, right? Shots. You all right? You going to go pee? I mean, it's a super horrible thing that no one else does, so I guess feel ashamed about it. As opposed to it being a natural process of eliminating body waste. Everybody pees. Everybody poops. Nobody poops but you. It's concentrated. It's concentrated evil coming out the back of you. That may be the best joke in that show. So anyway, so they hire prostitutes to. I mean, again, these men have to be sexually serviced, right? So they hire Brazilian Portuguese-speaking prostitutes, and they fly them to the mountains of whatever country these guys are in. And it's crazy because if you know anything about Portuguese, it's exactly the same as Spanish. A and B. Is nobody from Cuba and nobody from Brazil speak like the same language, right? Like nobody from Cuba speaks Portuguese and nobody from Brazil speaks Spanish. I mean, like, but that's the degree to which the CIA is run by a bunch of morons. It's the same. It's just it takes Spanish, all the E's, turn them into I's, boom, Portuguese. What were you gonna say? The CIA. Yeah. Yeah, they were like, we need to do these. These guys have been training really hard, learning how to shoot guns and crawl through the mud and like kill communists and stuff. We need to give them a party. So yeah, they need to like get some. We're gonna get some beers and we're gonna get some whatever, and then they hire some Brazilian prostitutes. Yeah. Well, I mean, they were. I mean, I have no idea what kind of prostitutes they hired. Maybe they were genuine capitalists who were like, sure, we'll take a bunch of money and go up the hills and like. But maybe they were like sexually trafficked women who were exploited by some. I don't know. But either way, it just blows my mind. The CIA was like, it's totally fine to use our budget to hire a bunch of hookers to fly into the mountains to sleep with a bunch of Cuban rebels. Yeah, no, it is highly ethically. But I mean, it's the CIA, which is operating under what I would charitably describe as no oversight, right? I mean, it's not like nobody's telling them what to do. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. You're from Israel. Has Mossad not done crazy stuff like this? I mean, literally, Benjamin Netanyahu dressed up as a woman and put grenades in his bra cups to kill guys that participated in. Okay, I'm just saying, because like Mossad has done some stuff. Probably, I don't know if Mossad has hired prostitutes.
Yeah. Israeli ethicists, okay? We've always fought.
Well, I mean, didn't Dr. Ruth fight in Irgun? Yeah, Dr. Ruth, the little tiny lady who was all like sex is cool. She was in Irgun. Well, yeah, but I mean, she fought like the British and stuff, and she was all like, I'll be a sniper and shoot bad guys for Israel or whatever." Well, yeah, I mean, well, and there was this was the Stern Gang was Irgun, and they blew up the hotel, the King David Hotel, and they killed all the British soldiers. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, nobody gets me like. Yeah. Well, it's like ETA in Spain would call and be like, "Hey, we're ETA. We're literally the Basque terrorist group. We're gonna blow up the police station." And they'd be like, "What?" And they'd be like, "No, like, like really? Like, we have a guy and he's gonna take a bomb." And they would be like, "Whatever." And finally, ETA was like, "Please, like, we don't want to kill anybody. We just want to send a message." And like, and eventually, like, the authorities in Basque territory got to the point where, like, when you get a phone call and it says there's a bomb, like, maybe take it seriously. But yeah, I just find it hilarious that the CIA, like, they really flew prod. They had a guy and they were like, "Hey, Mike, the CIA agent, hey, we need you to go to Rio and we need you to hire a bunch of hookers and we need you to pay for them, like, to fly in a plane to like Costa Rica or whatever, and just like don't ask questions or whatever." And Mike is like standing with a wad of money, was like, "I went to college to do this, right? Like, I went to college to go into some, slum in Rio and ask around and be like, who's got a bunch of hookers that, and does anyone know where I get like 20 girls or 50 girls or whatever?" And like, and somebody somewhere, they found them, right? They found women, they had cash, right? But it blows my mind that the CIA was like, "For real, let's do that," because I mean, like, pizzas, beer, okay, get a DJ, sure, but they were like, "No, let's give these guys a real party," right? And I guess they called the station chief in Brasilia and was like, "You need to, like, get us some women or whatever," and they did, and it's nuts. Oh yeah, no, it was yeah. I mean, it was, prostitution, and prostitution is illegal. So, and if it was legal and they were in Nevada and it was, but no, they was like, yeah, it's a little crass. But it's like that's the degree to which the CIA was like trying to take this as serious as possible in the weird way that they handled things. So, the real problem was, okay. So Orwell wrote 1984. And in the end of 1984, he put an appendix called Newspeak, which is the language used by the British government in 1984. And it gave us the idea that you can control the way people think by creating a language that only allows them to express themselves in certain limited ways, right? So if you take a concept and you delete the word from it, then people might not be able to imagine that concept, right? And so it's a fascinating way to think about the idea that language constructs reality, because language gives us the tools to be able to describe reality, and thus the ability you have to communicate with fellow humans is not limited by your imagination, but it's limited by the way that you can express it in the form of language. And of course, also raises the idea that, do people who speak other languages think differently than you because they construct their thoughts in a different way when they express them? Holy shit, if you think that, it's crazy. Right? If you really get into that, it'll blow your mind. But anyway, there's a great word that is a very Orwellian word, but it's not in the dictionary he come up, but it's very, very often called groupthink. And groupthink is where you get a bunch of people together who are individually very smart, and together they form one big stupid asshole. Right? And so imagine, for example, that you're a film editor.
I don't have to imagine.
Right. You're a film editor. This is the example I use in class. You're a film editor. You're good at your job. You edit films, right? The director will tell you what he wants, and you can turn his vision into a reality by taking all of the footage he shot, all the cameras he shot, and editing it into one really awesome cut, right? And so you go to work for a guy, and he gives you a bunch of film, and that movie is Transformers, Michael Bay, the Transformers film. And you think, oh, fuck. Because this movie is awful, and you know it's bad. Everyone knows it's bad. Everybody in it knows it's bad. Everybody associated with it knows it's one of the worst movies ever made. And yet you just, like, what do? You're not going to go to Michael Bay and be like, "Look, Michael Bay, in a just world, you would kill yourself for having produced such an abomination," right? You're going to be like, "Whatever, I'm just here to cash my paycheck, whatever. I'm going to make it the best I can." And in a way, that's the idea of the CIA. The CIA gets this plan. They get this plan, and in the Kennedy administration, they try to come up with the best version of the plan, and it's a shitty plan. It's a stupid plan, because the key thing is, when a bunch of Cuban exiles invade Cuba in 1961 to overthrow Castro, literally everyone is going to assume right off the bat that, guess what? It was the fucking USA, right? Of course it was. A bunch of fucking Cubans got a fleet of ships and a bunch of rifles and planes And then they all got together and they were like, dude, Miguel, do you hate Castro? I fucking hate Castro. Funny story, Miguel. I have a bunch of fucking planes. Oh shit. Oh shit, Jose. Together, let's get all of our Cuban friends and fucking invade Cuba. Like, that's not gonna happen. Like, it's not gonna fucking do that. And it's so patently obvious that the Cubans were put together by the American government, right? I mean, of course they were. Of course they were. And so, but of course, the American government went to great lengths to ensure that we were not connected to the process because we couldn't be seen to publicly overthrow a communist government because then the communists would try to overthrow Western governments, right? I mean, then they would try to overthrow the French government and fucking Britain and all this shit, right? And so, as a consequence, what happened is that the CIA could never really come up with an actual plan. And in order to, there's a part two where Kennedy was very skeptical about the plan. And when they presented the plan to him, he was like, I don't know. And they were like, okay, they had these meetings where like, look, we got to sell this to Kennedy. So basically tell him whatever the fuck he wants and then we do what we want, right? And so the presentation of the plan and the actual plan begin to diverge, right? Which is a big thing because they're not being honest with the president. And then on top of that, the plan, so the original plan was to land these guys at a beach in Cuba. And if they would go, so there's two plans kind of, do they overthrow Castro, right? Or do they go into the mountains, the Escambray Mountains in southern Cuba, and they lead like a guerrilla revolt against Castro, right? Do they sort of attack Castro, wear him down over the course of like a decade? Or do they just go for the jugular and overthrow the guy? And if they do the latter, do they ask for American help, right? Because like, would it seem ridiculous if they did? Because I mean, it would be a little pat if the Cuban guy like steps ashore and is like, I proclaim Fury Cuba, and then he calls the American like, please help me. And it was like, you know, I mean, like, that seems a little bit bullshit, right? So we were never quite really sure. And instead of coming up with A or B, the CIA kind of half-assed it. They were like, well, if we land them on the beach, maybe they can attack Castro, but if it fails, they can retreat to the Escambray Mountains. And it was like they never really committed to plan A or B. And they're different plans, right? It was one of those things where it's like, pick one. Either they overthrow Castro and you throw everything at once, or they flee to the Escambray Mountains and you kind of give them a way to get supplies and you wear Castro. But like you can't really do both. But the CIA kept trying to present it to Kennedy as like, well, you know, if we fail, we've got this out. We've got this escape plan. And they basically, it was one of those things where it's kind of like the emperor's new clothes, where nobody ever raised their hand and said, guys, I just want to let you know that this plan is unbelievably fucking stupid and we've wasted a ton of money. And like, maybe we need to just like reassess, right? It's like the film editor. At no point is the film editor go to Michael Bay and say, you are the worst filmmaker alive. And your movies are so awful that rather than watch them, people would probably rather be stabbed. And yet you're still going to make a bunch of money because people will go see anything. And like, no one's going to say that. You're like, if you're a junior CIA analyst, you're not going to go to the CIA. You're not going to go to Alan fucking Dulles and go to him and say, hey, this plan's stupid and you're stupid, right? Like maybe, like, I don't know if you know this Alan Dulles, but like, maybe not everybody in Cuba fucking hates Castro. Like maybe they actually think he's okay, right? Because Batista was a dictator, right? Castro may be a communist and you may hate him because you're a fucking asshole. But like, I don't know, maybe people in Cuba kind of like him because he's not a fucking dictator. Nobody does that. Again, like nobody, no assistant director on Transformers Revenge of the Fallen ever raised their hand and said, Michael Bay, you're the fucking worst. And if you just jumped in a river, you would spare us more of your awfulness. Right? By the way, if you're not aware, I don't like Michael Bay very much. The worst movie that's ever been made in the history of humanity is Armageddon. And anybody that disagrees with that, get the fuck out of my house. Right now. You like Armageddon? I hate it. It's so bad. It's so... No, it's got Ben Affleck in it, and I want to punch him in the face. And it's got... What does it have? What's good about the movie? The plot? No. The science? No. Michael Clark Duncan was ill-served by a movie that used his talents in an unfairly bad way. You watch The Green Mile, and you can see some good Michael Clark Duncan action. Yeah, he was better. He would be better in a video of him sleeping than in Armageddon, which is the worst movie I've ever seen. Well, I mean, then it's top of your list because it's the stupidest fucking... But again, it was one of those things where you had to know at some point when you watched Armageddon it was going to be a train wreck of a fucking movie. But like everyone's thinking like, I'm just here to get my... Deep Impact was 100 times better because it was 100 times less stupid. Let me ask you a question. This is a quote from Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck said to Michael Bay, why is it easier to train oil drillers to be astronauts than it is to train astronauts to be oil drillers? And Michael Bay said, "Shut your fucking mouth." And Ben Affleck said, "I did, and I got a 6-figure paycheck, or a 7-figure paycheck." Yeah. And so I mean that's the quintessential stupidity of the movie. Why wouldn't you just take some fucking astronauts and send them to oil driller school? Because I don't know, astronauts not a fucking hard job to do. Mhm. Look, just instead of watching Armageddon, I'm rolling it out here. Instead of watching Armageddon, watch Die Hard. Because Die Hard is 100 million times better. I would rather literally have a person shit in my mouth than watch Armageddon again.
That's not true.
It's absolutely true. Yeah, it's a Christmas movie. Why are they in Nakatomi Plaza after hours if not for Christmas? It's if you work in Nakatomi. If you work in Nakatomi Plaza and it hits 5, you go home. You go home to your fucking suburban McMansion in LA. You don't hang around Nakatomi Plaza. You're not there after hours. It's a fucking holiday Christmas party. It's a Christmas movie. I have a machine gun. Ho ho ho. He says ho ho ho, and the guy shoots him in the elevator. It's a Christmas movie. If Die Hard's not a Christmas movie, which is that's what a Christmas movie is. Look, Christmas movies are awful, and I hate them. And the only one Chevy Chase, I would like to hit Chevy Chase with the truck. He is the worst, such an asshole. Look, what's the worst part about Community, which is the best show about... Community is one of the best shows that's ever aired on TV, and the worst part is Chevy Chase, who insisted on picking a fight with everyone and then called sitcoms stupid. And it's like, you know the reason anyone under 30 knows your name? It's Community, right? He fell off the stairs as Ford. I know you remember remember the last funny thing Chevy Chase did? He fell off the stairs as Ford. It was 1976. Yeah. And so he was funny, but he was the weakest part of the show. Yeah, in my opinion. Yeah, he really Britted up that show. Boom.
How about the Bay of
Anyway, the Bay of Pigs, talk about Bay. So yeah, but the point I'm trying to get here is that when you're in an institution, you have an incredible pressure to just kind of conform, right? I mean, it's like you're a junior CI analyst, you're the titular filmmaker in Armageddon, and you at some point you have to think like, this is really not a good idea. We really haven't considered the possibility that this is just stupid and like, this isn't going to work, right? But like, no one's going to say that. No one's going to go to the CI director and be like, hey, the multi-billion-dollar plan that you've been putting together for like 5 years? It's completely fucking dumb. Right? And so instead, the CIA continues to like half-ass it. They're not sure exactly what kind of plan, but they're like, look, at the end of the day, Castro's a fucking communist. What do we know about communists? They're dumb or whatever. And we just go up there and we get some Cuban dude with a gun and be like, and Castro would be like, oh shit, I surrender or whatever. Fuck, oh shit. And then Kennedy comes after them and is like, look, guys, I'm not going to get caught with my pants down over this. If you attack Castro, I'm not going to send the Navy or the Air Force to help you, right? Because like we can't have American bombers bombing fucking Cuba and just be like they're not really Cuba, because like what's going to happen is some fucking Gary Powers was a U-2 pilot. U-2 was a spy plane. They flew him over Russia in the Eisenhower administration, and the Eisenhower administration was told by the CIA that the U-2 was we cannot shoot it down, right? And what happened is fucking Francis Gary Powers got his ass shot down over Russia. He didn't take his fucking suicide pill because he's a loser, and then the Russians caught his ass. Look, they gave you a suicide pill and they told you you had to take it. And if you didn't want to do it, maybe you shouldn't be a pilot for the fucking CIA. I'm just saying. Right?
And you spilled your wine.
It's fine. Some rabbits or some raccoons are going to get lit tonight. That's what I'm saying. And so, like, Gary Powers trying to be a fucking disaster because Khrushchev had a summit in Vienna with Eisenhower, and Khrushchev is like, look, I'm Khrushchev. Americans fly spy planes over Russia. And Eisenhower's like, oh my God, we totally don't. And Khrushchev is like, we have proof of spy plane. Do you deny? And Eisenhower's like, we totally don't fly. And he's like, cool, we have spy plane pilot in next room for you to look at. And Gary Powers is there. And Eisenhower is like, you fucking CIA guys told me he was dead. You told me he took a suicide pill, or if he parachuted out of a plane at like 25,000 feet, he would die. And the CIA was like, And so Khrushchev got to have a press conference like, everyone come to see lying American spy plane pilot fly over Russia, and look, it's him, he's alive from Kansas. And
Yeah, Brew. Sounds like Brew.
No, no. And flying military spy planes over Russia is an act of war. And the CIA assured Eisenhower that the only reason we would get away with it is the Russians they wouldn't admit it because they would look weak, right? I mean, if you complain about it, you look like a loser, right? And so the Russians kept their mouth shut, but they developed surface-to-air missiles that could shoot down spy plane, right? I mean, if you're Russian surface-to-air missile launcher designer, they come and they're like, hey, you think you could shoot down a plane that goes like under 20,000 feet? And I'm like, oh, that's impossible. Like, give it a shot or whatever, and they did. And so it was humiliating for Eisenhower, and he admitted it. He said to his advisor, I'm not going to lie 3 times, right? And so Kennedy said, we're not going to do some Gary Powers bullshit where you put fucking John Johnson from fucking Topeka, Kansas in a plane. He flies his ass over Cuba. He gets his ass shot down. And then we have to lie and say that he's fucking Cuban, right? Like this fucking white ass guy from Topeka, Kansas is going to be like, I am a Cuban. I am for real Cuban. And everybody's going to know that he's totally from, Minnesota or some shit, right? And so Kennedy tells the CIA, you're on your own. Like you have to do this on your own. And so the CIA launches this shit in like April of 1962, and they figure, and this is the hook, they figure that if they get to a situation where they're in the shit, they can present Kennedy with a terrible situation where they can say, look, you basically have to send the Navy in, right? Also, how terrible is it if I go to the bathroom?
Can you just wrap this up I mean, it's almost 8 o'clock.
Okay, we'll do it real fast. Actually, no, I can't. I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. I've had a bunch of wine. I have to go to the bathroom. Look, 30. Yes, I have to go to the bathroom. Please go inside. Okay. At least go off camera.
Oh my god. Very deja vu of this morning. Peeled off at like mile 4.5. I think make it 4 miles. 4.5. No better. Oh no, he needs that. Okay. I apologize to everybody that apparently Matt's bladder can't handle that much wine inside. Oh, I know, but no, he did not. Not at all. We did it a couple weeks ago. No. Oh, stop. Yeah, we gotta freeze the pita. Everybody's just listening to our generic chat happening. You take your sold out. And if you're sold out, that's very scary to me that I will sit there on a Saturday morning without a pita in my
Yeah, the cheese pita is a bomb. Okay, look, I've been having to pee for like an hour, and it took like, what, 30 seconds?
I mean, the amount of background chatter that people got subjected to.
Okay, so look, I pee literally as fast as you can pee. I mean, I peed pretty fast.
Okay, so
Yeah. All right. So Kennedy basically tells the CIA, look, you're kind of on your own. If you get stuck in a bad situation, I'm not going to send the Navy or whatever to bail you out, right? So what happens? To make a long story short, we got some Cuban news. We put them in planes, and again, it's completely random and totally believable that a bunch of fucking Cuban guys would end up with fighter planes or whatever, and they would fly them, into Cuba, and they blow up a bunch of shit, and everybody's like, okay, this is great, right? And so they land on, it's like April, I want to say it's April 17th, 1962. They land a bunch of dudes at the Bay of Pigs, and they get them on the beach, and at first they're like, this is for real, right? This is going to work, right? Except, amazingly, the plane attacks where they try to knock out Castro's Air Force. It's 1961. It's even faster than I thought, right? So Kennedy's only been president at this point a fucking month, right? No, 2 months because January. It's after 1933, so it's January. It's after 1933, so it's January, not April, not March. Okay, so Kennedy's only been president a short time, and they do this, and the attacks didn't really disable Castro's Air Force. And they did alert him, right? I mean, if a bunch of planes, mysterious fucking planes flying odd insignia, blow up a bunch of your airfields, you might think that Castro picked up the phone and was like, I guess everyone be on alert or whatever. And so a bunch of dudes land at this beach, the Bay of Pigs, and there's a bunch of militia there. And it's like, it was totally random that the militia were there. No one expected them to be there, but they were there. And so they get in a gunfight almost immediately, and there's a battle on the beach. And the CIA does what they would expect. They go to Kennedy and they're like, okay, Mr. President, like the attack is kind of being repulsed. Like, we need you to send in the Navy. And Kennedy's like, no, like I told you, we're not going to get American troops involved with the American. This is a CIA thing. And the attack fails. Right. The guys get bottled up on the beach. There's a big swamp to their west. The Escambray Mountains to the east where they were going to go, they can't easily get to. And so Castro just fucking kills them all. He shoots them on the beach. He captures a bunch of them. And Castro is able to parade these dudes in front of the world media and be like, hey, everyone, I guess you must be a big fucking deal if the Americans want to overthrow you, like they tried to do to me, right? And it's impossible to not suspect that America's fingerprints are all over this shit, right? And it was the CIA really fell down because at some point you have to take a minute and step back and say, is this really a good idea? Like, before we pull the trigger and people die, and they never did, right? There was that whole group think of like, nobody wanted to be the guy that raised their hand and said, is this actually stupid? Right? And again, like, I use the analogy of Michael Bay. At some point or other, someone must think to themselves, I watched a final cut of this movie and it's so awful, but like, do I really want to put my name on it? Like, are we really going to release this movie? Is this the movie we're going to put out? Right? And of course, no one does it because everyone's like, I'm just here to get paid, right? Like, I'm just the editor, I'm just the sound guy, like, whatever. I'm just the guy who, and that's what happens. The CIA just sort of, has this group thing that allows them to overlook the flaws in the plan, and they end up actually invading Cuba, and it's a fucking disaster. Right? Yeah.
I just want to point out that a Michael Bay movie is ultimately still just a movie, and nobody gets harmed.
Right. I mean, nobody
in a physical
dies.
way, as opposed to the Bay of Pigs.
No, I
where
was
people
emotionally
actually
harmed
died.
by a Michael Bay movie. No, because Last Action Hero has Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, and it's a good movie because it has Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. Oh, we're learning a lot of things tonight about people who don't like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was not a bad movie. It was not a bad movie. It was an Arnold's The Last Action Hero is one of the worst movies ever made. Do I even know you? Apparently not. I mean, yeah, it's upsetting to hear you say hurtful things like that. You're talking about the Governator right here. Well, okay, we've all made mistakes in our past all the time. Eraser is a good. You know who else is in Eraser? Arnold Schwarzenegger. So weird. Yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger is. Other than The Second Family, which is a little bit fucking crazy, I generally tend to uncritically support the movie career of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he's, Predator, Terminator 1, 2, and Kindergarten Cop. Kindergarten Cop. It's not a tumor. Fucking amazing.
Sorry.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Junior?
I don't know what you're talking about. Look, it was the 80s. Everybody made some. True Lies was good. Everybody made some mistakes in the 80s. Okay, we've all made some. I was born in the 80s too. I made some mistakes in the 80s too, like being alive in the 80s. So, but look, yeah. So anyway, what can you say about the Bay of Pigs? It was a disaster, and there's some effects of it that were significant. The first thing is it permanently soured relations between Kennedy and the CIA. Right? They didn't trust him because they thought that he was not really committed to fighting communism, and that he was willing to let them go out and hang on a limb. He didn't trust them because, of course, they'd fucking lied to him, right, about how this is a good plan and it's going to work, and it was a totally bullshit plan, right? And so the conspiracy theories about Kennedy's death, the CIA always figures prominently because, of course, the assumption is they wanted revenge for the Bay of Pigs, or they didn't trust him, or whatever, right? And so the next thing we can mention is that Castro was able to get a huge boost in popular support from the idea that he had been the Americans had attempted to assassinate him and failed, right? The Cubans had rallied to his defense, right? The militia that attacked Castro or attacked the Bay of Pigs was like a popular militia. And so, I mean, it was like Castro was like, look, all of you guys went on and defended me, like you must like me, right? And so it gave him a huge boost in popular support that allowed him to radicalize his revolution significantly. And also, we should mention Castro, in order to get protection, Castro signed a treaty with the Soviet Union, right? Castro, like privately, he sat down with his advisors and was like, the Americans tried to have me whacked, and they might do it again, right? I mean, like next time they might just get a fucking guy with a 30 caliber rifle, right? And you can't really defend against that. And so Castro signed a friendship treaty with the Soviet Union and Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet Union leader. And as a response, this leads to the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, where Castro is willing to allow the Soviets to put nuclear missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles, in Cuba in order to threaten the United States, which of course is the most dramatic moment of the Cold War, where we come closest to simply starting a Cold War because we can't tolerate the presence of missiles in Cuba. Right, and so the Kennedy administration, it was a terrible failure. The Bay of Pigs was so awful, and it was so avoidable. It was one of those things where if someone had just looked at the situation, they would have said, God, the Castro, he may be more popular than you think. The assumption that he's going to fall the moment the rebels land in Cuba is really flawed, and you need to pick one. Are these guys going to go guerrilla, or are they going to overthrow Castro? And are you really planning without getting American help? Right? I mean, like, are you really prepared for Kennedy to tell you no? And the CIA basically built into their plans the idea that when they got into the shit, Kennedy would basically give them like an okay, like, oh well, I guess I'm not going to let you fail or whatever. And so it was really a turning point. The CIA has been sort of not very good at gathering intelligence, and for the course of its history up until the recent years, it's really wanted to do covert ops, the CIA black ops movie bullshit, and that's not actually that effective, right? The KGB spent most of its history gathering intelligence and not planning crazy black ops, and it turned out that was actually much better. Providing the government with actionable, detailed intelligence is way better than these cockamamie bullshit schemes, and the CIA never figured that out, right? And so Bay of Pigs was a turning point because it really intensified the animosity between America and Cuba, and it drove Cuba into the arms of the Soviet Union, which became an intolerable problem for us in the summer of 1962 with the revelation that the Cubans had installed Soviet nuclear missiles. So that's the Bay of Pigs, by way of an analogy regarding Michael Bay.
Okay, so one, I need you to wrap it up and
Okay.
say bye, but two, before you do that, you need to have another shot of coffee creamer because apparently Katie's disgusted by it.
Who is Katie? Katie who? Oh, Katie Schreiber. Okay. Is Hawk mentioning that Katie's disgusted by it?
Yeah, a while ago they were really disgusted.
It's not coffee creamer. It's pre-mixed mint. What is it, like mint Kahlua that we bought?
Yeah,
White chocolate liqueur. Yeah. So it's actually liqueur. Yeah, it's grasshopper. We just put it in the empty creamer. We're not environmentally, in German, wir sind umweltfreundlich. We are environmentally friendly. And so we reused this plastic bottle after we cleaned it out to store our grasshoppers in because it is sealable and we can seal it. And so that's what we're doing. Because it was in a mixer, like a martini shaker, and it's not really airtight, it's not. So Dara put it in this, which we had already emptied, and we labeled it, so it's fine. And so I don't know what Katie's problem is, because it's some yeah. Well, I mean, Olivia would probably hate this because it's not ice water, which is the only fucking thing she drinks anyway. Yeah, which I don't understand. We have the good chocolate milk, which is basically melted ice cream, and I give it to her, and she's like, "It's okay," and I'm like, I could chug that, right? Other than the fact that it's like 400,000 calories per shot because it's fucking pure fat. But I don't know what Katie's problem is because we're just trying to be environmentally friendly and not contribute to the increasing environmental degradation of our planet, and also be able to save our grasshopper shots for later because we obviously I'm not going to fucking drink 24 ounces of this shit. So. Tiki Michelangelo says, I wish I was fucking Donatello or Leonardo, the best Ninja Turtles.
Nope.
Or Shredder.
Nope.
And with that, I'm turning off Matt's mic because he's just getting people more and more angry. Thank you for watching tonight and bearing with us through a multitude of topics as we as we did our grab bag thing. Next week, we'll probably go back to a singular topic at What do you mean? Where's the microphone? It's on my headset.
I am totally fine. I'm not that drunk. It's cool.
Second, I'm hoping that they can hear me. But anyway, I'm gonna play the closing credits, and we will see you all again next week. What? You want to talk?
Am I cool? Did you unfreeze me?
You're on mute.
Okay, I'm just saying. Thanks again to our Patreon subscribers. Subscribe to our Patreon, and you can receive many exciting things. Like you could ask us what you wanted, and we would give it to you, including but not limited to feet pics, which yes. But also, thanks again to our longtime supporters and as always, our audience who is here with us. And so we'll be here next week. And if there's a topic you want to talk about or a question you have, feel free to post it in the comments, and we will try to cover your topic, provided that I A, know about it, or B, have time to learn about it, and C, can talk about it while I am totally drunk, because I had like a bunch of shots or whatever from this cool thing that Dara got me, Katie.
It never went in the
bin. No, we didn't.
All right, good night, everyone.